When a blizzard locks a widowed mechanic and a tech billionaire in the same hotel room, neither of them expects to survive the night, let alone change each other's lives forever. The storm didn't ask permission, it just came. 70 miles per hour of wind and whiteout snow that swallowed the Colorado Rockies whole and buried every road leading out. And somewhere inside the last heated lodge on the mountain, a man who had already lost everything was about to share a room with a woman who thought she had it all. If you've ever been forced to sit still long enough to finally hear yourself think, you already know how this story ends. Like this video and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story has traveled. The first thing Wyatt Mercer noticed about the storm was the silence it created before it hit. He'd grown up in the high country, not Colorado, but Wyoming, close enough that he understood mountain weather the way a mechanic understands an engine. You don't have to see the parts moving to know something's about to break. You feel it. The air pressure drops, the temperature shifts 2 degrees in the wrong direction, animals go quiet. And then the sky turns a color that doesn't have a name, but that everyone who has ever seen it recognizes immediately. That flat, bone-colored gray that means get inside and stay there. He'd noticed it around 4 o'clock in the afternoon, when he'd pulled off U.S. Highway 285 to fill the gas tank at a station outside Fairplay. The attendant inside, a weathered woman in her 60s with a Denver Broncos cap pulled low, had looked at him the way people in small mountain towns look at anyone who's about to do something stupid. "You heading up toward Breckenridge?" she'd asked. "Trying to get to Buena Vista," Wyatt had said. "Just a quick trip. Weekend thing." She'd squinted at him, then at the back seat, where Sadie was asleep against the window with her purple coat bunched up as a pillow and a half-eaten granola bar still in her hand. "Road's gonna close," the woman had said. "Maybe tonight. Maybe sooner." Wyatt had nodded like he was taking it seriously. He'd thanked her, taken his receipt, and pulled back onto the highway anyway. That was his first mistake. He could make a list of mistakes if he wanted to. He'd become reasonably skilled at that over the last 4 years, cataloging his failures with the same methodical attention he gave to engine diagnostics at the shop. Mistake number 1, ignoring the gas station woman. Mistake number 2, not checking the National Weather Service update that had apparently been broadcasting all afternoon. Mistake number 3, leaving Denver at 2 in the afternoon on the Friday before a major winter storm system because he'd promised Sadie that they would see snow-covered mountains, real mountains, not the ones they could see from the highway. And he was a man who tried, harder than most, to keep the promises he made to his daughter. Sadie was 6 years old, and she did not care about weather forecasts. She cared about mountains and hot chocolate and whether the lodge would have a fireplace. She had asked about the fireplace 7 times during the drive. Wyatt had told her yes, every single time, because he was 90% sure it would, and because listening to her ask the question was the best part of his week. By the time the snow started in earnest, it was past 5:30, the light was gone, and Wyatt's windshield wipers were losing the argument. He had both hands on the wheel and his jaw set in the way it got when he was working through a problem. Not panicking, not yet, just calculating. Sadie was awake now, pressed against the window on the passenger side, watching the snowflakes with the kind of raw fascination that only children and people who've forgotten to be afraid can manage. "It's so much," she said quietly. "Yeah. Is it a blizzard?" "Getting there." She thought about this. "Is that dangerous?" "We're going to be fine," he said. "I'm going to find us a place to stop." She accepted this without argument, the way she often accepted his assurances. Not blindly, but because she had learned, in whatever calculus 6-year-olds use to evaluate the adults in their lives, that her father was usually right about the things that mattered. She turned back to the window. "The snow looks like TV static," she said. "The old kind, from the channels that weren't there." Wyatt glanced at her. He had no idea how she knew about TV static. She'd been born in 2018. She'd never seen a television set that wasn't digital, but that was Sadie. She picked things up from conversations, from books, from listening in ways that kids her age weren't supposed to be able to do yet. She was strange and luminous and exhausting in the best possible way, and she was the single reason Wyatt Mercer got out of bed every morning. The lodge appeared out of the dark like something a person might hallucinate. It was set back from the road about 100 yards, A two-story timber and stone structure with warm light bleeding from every window. A hand-painted sign near the highway read, Harlan's Mountain Lodge. Vacancies. Wyatt hit the signal, turned, and felt the truck's rear end slide 4 inches before the tires caught. He corrected without thinking, muscle memory from a decade of driving in bad weather, and brought them down the access road in one piece. He exhaled when he cut the engine. "Is this it?" Sadie asked. "Is there a fireplace?" "We're going to find out." Well, the inside of Harlan's Lodge smelled like pine resin, old wood, and something faintly sweet. Maybe cinnamon, maybe just the idea of warmth after cold. It was full. That was the first thing Wyatt clocked when he came through the door, stomping snow from his boots and steering Sadie ahead of him by the shoulders. Every chair in the small lobby was occupied. People with the stunned, slightly resentful look of travelers who've been stranded somewhere comfortable clustered around a stone fireplace. Yes, there it was. Sadie was already pulling toward it like a compass needle finding north. The front desk was staffed by a man who looked to be about 60, with a thick gray mustache and the bearing of someone who had been managing crises long enough to find them only mildly inconvenient. His name tag said Dale. "I know what you're about to ask," Dale said before Wyatt got 2 words out, "and I've been saying the same thing for the last hour. I need a room." "Don't have one." Wyatt placed both hands flat on the desk. He was 6 feet even, broad through the shoulders in the way that comes from actual work rather than a gym, with grease-darkened knuckles and a face that was younger than it felt from the inside. He'd been told he looked like he was carved from something. He'd never been sure if that was a compliment. "Sir," he said carefully, "I have a 6-year-old girl with me, and the road behind us is about to disappear." Dale looked past him at Sadie, who had found the fireplace and was now standing directly in front of it with her hands out, face tipped up, eyes closed in pure animal satisfaction. "I see that," Dale said. He pinched the bridge of his nose. "I've got one room I've been holding, corner suite, 2nd floor. Heating system up there's been acting up, so I didn't want to put anyone in it unless I had to." "I'll take it." "You can't." Dale set a pen down on the counter with the specific care of a man editing his own words. "There's already someone assigned to it. A guest who arrived an hour ago. Single occupancy." He paused. "However, and I want to be clear that I am not excited about this. If both parties agreed, it's a suite. 2 beds, separate bathroom area." Another pause. "I'm just saying it's technically possible." "Who's the other guest?" Dale glanced toward the fireplace, then toward the far end of the lobby, where a woman sat alone at a small table near the window, a laptop open in front of her, a glass of wine untouched at her elbow. She was dressed like she'd planned a different kind of weekend. Dark coat, structured, expensive-looking, and she was typing something with the focused intensity of a person trying very hard not to be where they currently were. "That's her," Dale said. But her name, Wyatt would learn later, was Vivian Hartwell. At that moment, approaching her across a creaking lobby floor with his snow-damp jacket and his daughter trailing behind him, he knew none of that. He knew only what he could see, which was a woman in her early 30s who was clearly irritated about something, and who looked up from her laptop with the expression of someone expecting a waiter and receiving something considerably worse. "I'm sorry to bother you," he said. "Then don't," she said, not unkindly, but not warmly either. She looked back at her screen. "The lodge is full. I've got my daughter with me. I heard you at the desk." She didn't look up. "The walls aren't thick." "There's one room left, a suite. The manager says it's got 2 beds, and he suggested, no." Simple, automatic, a word she'd clearly practiced. Wyatt looked at Sadie, who was standing beside him now, looking up at the woman with open curiosity and no self-consciousness whatsoever. "Hi," Sadie said. The woman blinked. She looked at Sadie the way some people look at children, not with hostility exactly, but with the slight uncertainty of someone who has not spent much time around them. "Hi," she said, a half-second slower than a person who was comfortable. "I'm Sadie, I'm 6. Do you work on a computer a lot?" "Yes." "My dad says too much screen time makes your eyes go square." The woman's mouth moved. It wasn't quite a smile, but it was adjacent to one. "Sadie," Wyatt said. Then to the woman, "I understand the room is yours. I'm not trying to take it from you. But we've been on the road for 3 hours, the temperature's still dropping, and I don't have anywhere else to go tonight. I'm asking, not demanding, asking if you'd consider sharing. The suite has 2 full beds, and I promise you, I'll stay completely out of your way. I don't need conversation. I just need somewhere for my kid to sleep. The woman looked at him for a long moment. He held eye contact because that was something he'd learned. That when you're asking someone for something you genuinely need, looking away first costs you the argument before you've made it. I work late, she said. I have calls in the morning. Fine. If the heating is broken, I'll fix it. She raised one eyebrow. You'll fix it. I'm a mechanic. HVAC isn't that different from anything else, and it's usually a simpler problem than people think. I'll figure it out. He said it without bravado, just the plain confidence of someone who meant it. She studied him for another moment. Then she closed the laptop. I'm a light sleeper, she said. I'll be quiet. And your daughter? Wyatt and Sadie looked at each other. I can be quiet, Sadie said with the slightly overpromising sincerity of a person who had no actual intention of being quiet. The woman stood up. She was taller than he'd expected, maybe 5'8", and she carried herself like someone who had spent years being the tallest presence in every room, regardless of her actual height. She picked up the laptop and tucked it under one arm. She extended the other hand. Vivian Hartwell, she said, try not to leave your boots in the middle of the floor. Wyatt shook her hand. Her grip was firm and businesslike. Wyatt Mercer, he said. I won't. Sit. The suite was on the northeast corner of the second floor, which meant it caught the wind on 2 sides. Walking down the hallway toward it, they could hear the blizzard working on the building the way an argument works on a relationship. Not destructive exactly, but insistent, probing every gap, looking for a way in. The room itself was decent. Pine paneling on the walls, 2 queen beds separated by a nightstand and a lamp, a small sitting area near the window where the frost was already forming patterns on the glass. There was a bathroom with a folding door that didn't close all the way, and a radiator in the corner that clicked and hissed and produced, if Wyatt put his hand over it, a faint and thoroughly unconvincing warmth. Sadie immediately chose the bed closest to the window. I can watch the snow, she announced. You need to sleep, Wyatt said. I'll sleep while watching the snow. Vivian set her laptop bag down on the desk near the far wall and pulled out a phone, checking something with the precision of a woman running multiple simultaneous timelines. She'd barely glanced at the room. Are you hungry? Wyatt asked his daughter. I want hot chocolate. I'll go find out what the lodge has. You stay here. He looked at Vivian. I'll be back in 10 minutes. She didn't look up from her phone. I didn't ask for a schedule. He went to the kitchen, or what passed for one, a half-staffed galley operation in the back of the lodge where a teenage boy named Marcus was heating soup and looking tired. Wyatt got Sadie hot chocolate and a grilled cheese sandwich and got himself black coffee. He also asked Marcus about the heating situation. Second floor's been off and on, Marcus said. Dale keeps meaning to get someone to look at it, but the HVAC guy from town said he can't come until... He shrugged. Definitely not tonight. What kind of system? I don't know, man. Old. Where's the main unit? Marcus pointed him toward a utility closet at the end of the second-floor hallway that turned out to house a train gas furnace that was, as Wyatt had guessed, not actually broken. It had a clogged filter, a faulty thermocouple sensor, and a pilot light that had gone out and not reignited because of a blocked igniter. 45 minutes later, with a mini flashlight from his truck's glove box and a set of basic tools he kept in his bag, because old habits from years of roadside work didn't die easy, he had the unit running at full output. He came back to the room to find Sadie asleep. Genuinely, definitively asleep. Curled up on her side, facing the window with the blanket pulled up to her ear and the hot chocolate half finished on the nightstand. Vivian was at the desk, laptop open, earbuds in, a yellow legal pad beside her covered in handwriting so compact it was nearly illegible. She pulled one earbud out when she heard him come in. It's warmer, she said. It wasn't quite an acknowledgement. It was closer to a notation. Should hold through the night. He pulled off his jacket and draped it over the foot of his bed. You can put the heat to 68 or so now, and it'll keep up. She looked at him. You actually fixed it. Yeah. You said you would. I usually do what I say I'm going to do. She held his gaze for a half-second too long, the kind of look that happens when someone says something ordinary that somehow lands at a frequency they weren't expecting. Then she looked back at her laptop. "The Wi-Fi's slow," she said. "Mountain Lodge in a blizzard," he said. "I'd be surprised if it's on at all." "I have a presentation to prepare. I've got a board meeting on Monday morning." "You're not going to make a Monday morning board meeting," Wyatt said, as gently as he could. "Look outside." She did look outside. For a moment something moved across her face. Not quite fear, not quite frustration, but something older and less defined than either. Then it was gone, replaced by the polished, calibrated composure he was starting to understand was her default. "I'll make it work," she said. He didn't argue. Sadie woke up at 11:30 at night, the way she sometimes did. Not afraid, not disoriented, just awake, as if a switch had been flipped somewhere. She sat up in the dark, looked at her father's bed. Empty. He was in the chair by the window, reading something on his phone, then looked at Vivian's bed. "You're not sleeping either," Sadie said to Vivian. Vivian was sitting up against the headboard, legal pad in her lap, writing by the light of her phone's flashlight app. The Wi-Fi had, as Wyatt predicted, finally given up around 10. "No," Vivian said. "Do you have trouble sleeping?" Vivian glanced at Wyatt, who had lowered his phone and was watching the conversation with the wary attentiveness of a man who had learned that his daughter's late-night conversations could go absolutely anywhere. "Sometimes," Vivian said. "My dad has trouble sleeping too," Sadie said. "He's up a lot. He reads and he thinks. He doesn't know I notice, but I do." "Sadie," Wyatt said softly. "She asked," Sadie said. I asked, but still." Vivian put the legal pad down. "What does he think about?" Sadie considered this with the seriousness she gave to most things. "He thinks about work, and he thinks about how to make things better, and sometimes he thinks about my mom, but he doesn't talk about that part." The room went quiet. The blizzard pressed against the windows with a sound like breath. Steady, enormous, indifferent. Wyatt cleared his throat. "All right, Sadie Bird, lie back down." "I'm not tired." "You're exhausted. You're just running on stubbornness." She lay back down, but she faced outward toward the room rather than toward the window. She looked at Vivian. "What are you writing?" "Notes," Vivian said. "For work." "What kind of work?" "I run a company, a technology company." "Like computers?" "Like software, programs that help businesses organize information." Sadie thought about this. "That sounds hard." "It is," Vivian said. "Is it fun?" Another pause, longer this time. "It's important," Vivian said. Sadie looked at her in the uncomplicated, direct way children look at adults when they sense a distinction has been made that matters. "That's not the same as fun," she said. Vivian Hartwell, founder and CEO of Hartwell Systems, which had last been valued at $4.3 billion and had been featured on the cover of Forbes, Fast Company, and Wired in the last 18 months, opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. "No," she said, "it's not." "My dad says," Sadie started. "Sadie," Wyatt stood up from the chair. "That's enough for tonight, okay? Close your eyes." Sadie closed her eyes with the practiced patience of someone who knew better than to push. Within a few minutes, her breathing had smoothed out and deepened, and she was asleep again, one hand tucked under her cheek. Vivian watched her for a moment. Then she looked at Wyatt. "What happened to her mother?" she asked. She kept her voice low enough not to carry. Wyatt picked up his phone again. "Car accident 4 years ago." "I'm sorry." "Yeah." He said it the way he always said it, not dismissively, but with the compressed quality of a word that has been used so many times to absorb so many different kinds of grief that it has become load-bearing. "Me too." Vivian was quiet. Outside, the wind shifted, a sound like a long exhale, as if the storm itself had decided to take a breath. "How do you do it?" she asked. "Do what?" "That." She gestured vaguely toward Sadie, toward the half-finished hot chocolate, toward all of it. "Everything. By yourself." Wyatt looked at his daughter sleeping. "You just do," he said. You don't really have a choice, and once you realize that, it gets less heavy. He paused. Not light, just less. Vivian picked up the legal pad and then set it down again without writing anything. I should sleep, she said. Probably. She reached for her phone, then stopped. Thank you, she said. For the heat. Don't worry about it. I don't. She stopped, started again. I'm not used to people doing things without wanting something in return. Wyatt looked at her steadily. I wanted somewhere for my kid to sleep. That was it. He picked up his phone and put it face down on the nightstand. Good night, Ms. Hartwell. She turned off her own light. Vivian? She said quietly to the dark. Sorry? My name is Vivian, not Ms. Hartwell. A beat. Good night, Wyatt. What? The morning arrived white and absolute. Wyatt was up before 6. Old habit, shop opened at 7. Brain refused to quit even when the body needed it to. He stood at the window with his coffee, watching the blizzard still working its way across the landscape, and tried to remember the last time he'd been somewhere genuinely beautiful with nowhere to be. He couldn't. Sadie woke up at 6:45 and immediately went to the window. It's still going, she said, pressing her nose to the glass. We're stuck. Looks like. She turned around with an expression of pure, uncomplicated joy. So we don't have to leave today? Doesn't look like it, no. Can we get pancakes? He laughed, a real one, the kind that came up from somewhere low in his chest without asking permission. Yeah, he said. We can get pancakes. Vivian was still asleep, or at least still horizontal, facing the wall with the covers pulled up. Wyatt shepherded Sadie into the bathroom with strict instructions about toothbrushing and volume control, and then they slipped out of the room without waking her. Downstairs, the lodge had taken on the specific atmosphere of a building full of people who have accepted their circumstances and are making the best of them. Dale had put out a continental breakfast, juice, coffee, pastries, and a griddle operation that an older woman named Constance was running with the efficiency of someone who had been feeding large groups in small kitchens her entire life. Wyatt got Sadie a plate of pancakes. He got himself eggs and toast. They sat at a table near the fireplace, which was going again, stacked high. Sadie ate her pancakes with the focused attention she gave to all food she actually enjoyed, and Wyatt watched the room. The stranded families, the couple in their 30s who kept arguing quietly in the corner, the older man reading a newspaper with a magnifying glass, the teenager on his phone with the resigned expression of someone whose social life was currently buried under 12 inches of snow. Do you think the lady upstairs is lonely? Sadie asked. I don't know, Wyatt said. I don't know her. She looks lonely. Sadie stabbed a piece of pancake. Like the way people are lonely when they're by themselves a lot, but they don't notice anymore. He looked at his daughter. Where do you get this stuff? I pay attention. She said it matter-of-factly, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. You taught me that. He had. He'd told her when she was maybe 3 or 4 that the most important skill in the world was paying attention. To engines, to weather, to what people didn't say. He hadn't expected her to take it quite this seriously. She might just be tired, he said. She's tired and lonely, Sadie said. Those are different, but they can happen at the same time. Wyatt drank his coffee. Eat your pancakes. Sit. By 9 in the morning, Vivian was downstairs. She'd changed into something slightly less corporate, dark jeans, a cream-colored sweater, boots, but her posture was identical to the night before. Back straight, eyes scanning, the involuntary readiness of someone whose body doesn't know how to be off duty. She got coffee from the buffet and stood for a moment looking at the available seating as if performing a rapid tactical assessment. Sadie waved at her from across the room. Vivian hesitated, then walked over. Good morning, she said. Good morning, Sadie said. We have pancakes. Dad got extra. I see that. She looked at the empty chair across from Wyatt. I don't want to intrude. You're not intruding, Wyatt said. Sit down. She sat. She wrapped both hands around her coffee mug and looked out the window at the weather. Road's closed, Wyatt said. Dale confirmed it this morning. The county sealed it around 4 a.m. They're saying at least another 24 hours before the state highway department can get through. Vivian processed this. Her jaw moved slightly. The board meeting can be moved. You don't know that. You could call them. She stopped. The service up here is intermittent, he said. Yeah, but there's usually a window in the late morning when it clears up for a bit. Dale says it's something about the towers. She looked at her phone. Signal, 1 bar, wavering. She set it down and picked up her coffee again. Did you sleep? He asked. Not really. She said it without self-pity, just data. Do you sleep most nights? She glanced at him sharply, like the question was an intrusion. Then, apparently deciding it wasn't hostile. 4 or 5 hours. By choice? By necessity. There's too much to... She stopped. There's a lot to manage. How many people work for you? Hartwell Systems employs 2,312 people worldwide. She said it the way she probably said it in every keynote speech, every interview, every boardroom preamble, with the precise fluency of a person who has recited a fact so many times it has become armor. But she said it quietly, and something around her eyes when she said it was not quite pride. That's a lot of people to be responsible for, Wyatt said. Yes. Is it ever too much? She looked at him. Is what ever too much? The responsibility, the size of it. Vivian Hartwell took a sip of her coffee and looked out the window at the Colorado mountains disappearing into white. I built it to be too much, she said. That's the only way you keep building. You always have to make the next thing slightly larger than the last thing you could handle. She set the mug down. If it ever stopped feeling like too much, I'd know I'd stopped growing. Wyatt thought about that. What happens when you want to stop growing? She looked at him like he'd asked the question in a foreign language. He didn't press it. He just let it sit there, between them, alongside the coffee and the plate of extra pancakes, and the sound of Sadie narrating something quietly to herself about the patterns Frost was making on the window. Outside, the blizzard kept coming. Neither of them said anything else for a while, and it was the specific kind of silence that forms not from the absence of things to say, but from the presence of things that are too large and too unformed yet to speak out loud. Sadie finished her pancakes. She looked at both of them across the table. I think today's going to be good, she said, with the serene confidence of a person who has not yet learned to distrust her own instincts. Wyatt smiled at his daughter. Vivian looked at her for a moment and then did something Wyatt suspected she did rarely and without awareness. She exhaled, long and slow, like she'd been holding it since the night before. Yeah, Vivian said softly. Maybe it will be. The storm that had sealed them inside Harlan's mountain lodge was not finished with them. It had, in fact, barely started. The meteorologists would later call it one of the most significant winter weather events in the Colorado Rockies in a decade. 31 inches in 40 hours, wind gusts up to 82 miles per hour, a cold snap that drove temperatures down to 7 degrees Fahrenheit before it finally exhausted itself and moved east. None of the 26 people inside the lodge knew any of that yet. What they knew was that the road was gone, the Wi-Fi was unreliable, the cell service flickered in and out like a bad radio station, and the heating systems, now running properly thanks to a mechanic from Denver with a flashlight and a set of basic tools, was the most important machine in the building. What they did not know yet was that the storm was not just weather. It was for two people who had not planned on being in the same room or the same life, a reckoning, the kind that doesn't announce itself, the kind that arrives the way all the important things do, quietly, without permission, when you least expect it and are least prepared. The blizzard kept falling, and inside the lodge on the second floor, in a corner suite with frost on the windows and the smell of coffee drifting up from the kitchen, a 6-year-old girl pressed her nose to the glass and watched the snow fall like static from a channel that was finally, after years of silence, beginning to come through. The second day inside Harlan's lodge had a different texture than the first. The first day had been about survival, finding warmth, finding food, finding some workable version of coexistence in a room that had not been designed for 3 strangers. The second day was slower and more uncomfortable in a way that had nothing to do with the weather. When the immediate emergency fades and people are left with nothing but time and each other, the real friction begins. Not the dramatic kind, the quiet kind. The The kind that comes from two people who live completely different lives being forced to share the same 40 square feet of breathing room with no exit and no distraction. Vivian had her legal pad. She had her phone, which picked up one bar of service for about 20 minutes every late morning. She'd confirmed this by standing in different spots around the room, like a person doing a very tedious scavenger hunt. She had the remnants of a presentation she could technically work on without internet access if she focused. She was trying, with the discipline of someone who had built a multi-billion-dollar company on nothing but discipline, to treat this as a remote working day. A disruption, yes. An inconvenience, certainly. But manageable. Wyatt had Sadie. And Sadie, by 9:30 in the morning, had located every child in the lodge, 3 of them, ranging in age from 5 to 9, and organized them into what she called the Snow Club, which appeared to have no actual charter or rules, but which met continuously in the lodge's small common room and involved a great deal of noise. This meant that Wyatt, for stretches of an hour or two at a time, had nothing to do. He was not by nature good at nothing. His hands needed work the way other men needed coffee, not for the pleasure of it, but because idleness had a physical weight he'd never been able to tolerate. At the shop there was always something. At home there was Sadie. Here, with Sadie occupied and the storm making any outdoor option laughable, and the lodge not exactly needing a second mechanic, he found himself drifting. He read for a while. He helped Dale reinforce the weather stripping on the front door, which had been letting cold air seep in around the frame. He drank too much coffee. And eventually, around 11 in the morning, he found himself sitting in the chair across from Vivian Hartwell in their shared suite while she worked and the blizzard conducted its ongoing argument with the windows. He didn't mean to watch her. He was looking at his phone, half reading an article about engine modifications he'd been meaning to get to for 3 weeks. But people in small spaces become impossible not to notice, and what he noticed was this. She wrote constantly, but she also stopped constantly. She'd write 4 or 5 lines in that compressed, urgent handwriting, and then she'd put the pen down and stare at the pad like it had said something offensive. Then she'd pick the pen back up and cross something out. Then she'd put it down again. Then she'd reach for her phone, remember the service was bad, and set the phone back down with the specific frustration of someone who has accidentally grabbed a cup expecting coffee and received empty air. "You're stuck," he said, without looking up from his own phone. She didn't answer immediately. "I'm working." "You've crossed out the same section 3 times. A pause. "How do you know that?" Small room. She put the pen down. "I'm preparing a restructuring proposal for the board. We're expanding into enterprise logistics. It's a significant pivot from our core competency, and the board has concerns, and I need to address those concerns in a way that's both technically credible and—" She stopped. "You don't know what any of that means." "Some of it," Wyatt said. "Not all of it. The point is, it's complicated." "What's the part you keep crossing out?" She looked at him with the expression she'd worn the night before when he'd fixed the heating. That slight recalibration, like she'd prepared for a certain kind of conversation and received a different one instead. "The rationale," she said. "Why we should make this pivot now, at this particular moment, when the market is contracting and our margins are already—" She exhaled. "It's complicated." "Do you believe in the pivot?" "Of course I do. I proposed it." "Then what's the problem?" She tapped the pen against the legal pad. "The problem is that I need to convince 12 people who do not think the way I think, who operate from a fundamentally risk-averse framework, that taking a calculated risk right now is not just defensible but necessary. And I need to do that in a document, without being in the room, without being able to read them and adjust in real time, which is—" She stopped again. "I'm better in rooms than on paper." "Most people are," Wyatt said. "Not me. Usually." She frowned at the pad. "Usually I can translate. Usually I can make the case on paper and then make it better in person. But right now I can't—" She picked up the pen and made a small, irritated mark. "I can't get the opening right. If the opening is wrong, the whole thing is wrong." "What are you trying to say in the opening?" She looked at him. "Are you seriously asking me to explain enterprise software strategy to a—" She caught herself. "To a mechanic," he said. "I didn't say that." "You were thinking it." She had the decency to look slightly uncomfortable. "I was going to say someone outside the industry." "Right." He set his phone down. He wasn't offended, Not exactly, but he wasn't going to pretend the implication wasn't there either. Go ahead then. Say what you're trying to say. Don't explain the industry. Just say the thing. She stared at him. Then she looked at the legal pad. She was quiet for almost 30 seconds, which in Wyatt's experience was an extremely long time for Vivian Hartwell to be quiet about anything. The company needs to grow into something it's never been before, she said slowly, because what it is now is almost everything it was built to become. And the only way to stay relevant is to become something new. The risk isn't in changing, the risk is in staying the same. She said it to the legal pad, not to him, and then she picked up the pen and started writing. Wyatt picked up his phone. Neither of them said anything for a while. Right. The heating held through the morning, but by 1 in the afternoon the wind had found a new vulnerability. A gap somewhere around the chimney flashing on the roof that sent cold air in a thin, persistent stream through the ceiling of the second-floor hallway. Not dangerous. Not even particularly dramatic. Just enough to make the corridor feel like the inside of a refrigerator and to drive everyone on the upper floor to communal spaces on the ground level. The lodge's common room, which had seemed adequately sized the evening before, now held most of the 26 residents in various configurations of proximity and patience. The fireplace was doing heroic work. Dale had produced a stack of board games from a closet. Scrabble, Clue, a battered Monopoly set missing half its pieces, and distributed them with the practiced detachment of someone who has presided over this exact situation before. Sadie found Wyatt near the fireplace and pulled him toward a table where she had already established a Scrabble game with 2 of her new Snow Club associates, a 5-year-old named Petra, who couldn't read yet but had opinions about tile placement, and an 8-year-old named Dominic, who could read very well and was taking the game far more seriously than the situation warranted. "You're on my team," Sadie told Wyatt. "Since when do teams exist in Scrabble?" "Since I decided," she said. "Vivian can be on your team too if she wants." Wyatt looked up. Vivian had come downstairs and was standing near the fireplace with her coffee, looking at the board game situation with an expression he was starting to recognize. That slight hesitation that came not from reluctance but from genuine uncertainty about what to do with herself in a context that had no agenda. "You want to play?" he asked. "I haven't played Scrabble in—" She thought about it. "I honestly can't remember. It's not that complicated. I know how Scrabble works." "Then sit down." She sat. She held her coffee with both hands and looked at the tiles with the focused assessment of someone who approaches everything as a problem to be solved efficiently. Within 4 turns, she had played quota on a triple-word score with the Q landing on a double-letter tile, and Dominic was looking at her with a new and slightly resentful respect. "You're good at this," Sadie said. "I like patterns," Vivian said. "It's essentially pattern recognition." "My dad says everything is pattern recognition if you look at it right," Sadie said. "Your dad says a lot," Vivian said, without looking up from her tiles. "He does," Sadie agreed. "Most of it is pretty good." Wyatt, who had just played Drift for a modest 11 points, said nothing. The game went on for the better part of an hour. Vivian won by a significant margin, which she accepted without gloating, but also without any false modesty. Dominic demanded a rematch. Petra fell asleep in her chair with 3 tiles still in her hand. Sadie had managed to use the word pizza, which was not actually a word in competitive Scrabble, but which she defended so vigorously that everyone agreed to let it stand. It was, Wyatt thought, the most normal hour he'd spent in a while. Not easy, exactly. Vivian was not an easy person. She corrected Dominic twice on tile scoring without softening the correction, and she had a way of going very quiet and very inward between turns that made the air around her feel slightly pressurized. But there was something underneath all of it, something that surfaced occasionally, in a dry half-comment or in the way she looked at Sadie when Sadie said something unexpected, that felt less like the woman on the cover of Fast Company, and more like a person who had simply gotten very good at being something she'd decided to be, and had forgotten whether that decision still fit. The afternoon went the way afternoons go in snowbound places, slowly, with the specific heaviness of time that has nowhere to be. Some people napped, some people read. The couple in the corner had apparently resolved whatever they'd been arguing about and were now sitting close together sharing a paperback. The older man with the newspaper had moved on to a crossword. Wyatt found himself in the kitchen around 3 o'clock, helping Constance prep for dinner because she asked and because he didn't know how to not help when someone asked. He peeled potatoes and chopped onions while she made a beef stew large enough to feed the lodge twice over. And they talked about nothing in particular. The storm, the road conditions, her daughter who lived in Boulder, his shop. "You a single dad?" she asked, without preamble. "Yeah." "How long?" "4 years." She nodded like she was filing this information. "It shows," she said, and it wasn't an insult. It was an observation. Kids raised by people paying attention come out a certain way. That little girl of yours, she's something else. "She is," Wyatt said. "The woman you're sharing with." Constance stirred the stew without looking at him. "She's having a rough time of it." "How do you mean?" "People who can't sit still, who look at the door like it owes them something." She shrugged. "I've been running kitchens in places like this for 40 years. You see a lot of people stuck somewhere they didn't plan to be. Most of them adjust. Some of them fight it the whole time." She paused. "She's fighting it." Wyatt said nothing. He kept chopping. "Not a criticism," Constance added. "Some people just haven't learned how to be anywhere yet." He thought about that on his way back upstairs, where he found Vivian sitting on her bed with her laptop open and a look on her face that confirmed everything Constance had just said. She was not fighting the laptop. She was fighting something behind it. "Service window?" he asked. "For 11 minutes, she said. "I sent 3 emails, got on a 30-second call with my COO before it dropped, and confirmed that my board meeting has been moved to Tuesday." She closed the laptop. "So that's done." "Good." "It doesn't feel good." She said it flatly. "It feels like losing a day." "It was going to be a lost day regardless," he said. "The storm didn't ask your schedule." "I know that." "Do you?" She looked at him sharply. It was the second time he'd said something that landed at an angle she wasn't braced for, and her reaction was the same as the first time. That quick, almost involuntary refocus, like someone who's been looking one direction and heard a sound behind them. "What is that supposed to mean?" she asked. Wyatt sat down in the chair by the window. The blizzard was still at it outside. Lower visibility now, the trees at the edge of the property barely visible through the wall of white. "You said it feels like losing a day, like the day had a purpose that got taken away." "It did." "What was the purpose?" "The board meeting, closing the proposal, getting the quarterback on." "No." He stopped her, not unkindly. "I mean, what was the day for? Not the work, the day." She stared at him. "Every day I work," he said. "There's the work, and then there's what the day is actually for. Yesterday, the day was for getting Sadie somewhere she'd never been, because she'd been asking about real mountains for 3 months, and I kept saying, soon, 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 the work is how you get there. But the day is for something else." He paused. "What's this day for?" Vivian looked at her closed laptop. She looked at the window. She was quiet long enough that he thought she wasn't going to answer. "I don't know," she said. "I haven't thought about days like that in a long time." "When did you stop?" "I don't—" She stopped. "Probably when the company hit a certain size. When you are responsible for a certain number of people, a certain amount of capital, a certain number of—" She made a small, controlled gesture with her hand. "You stop thinking about days and start thinking in quarters, fiscal years, roadmaps." "And you like that?" "I'm good at it." "That's not what I asked." She turned and looked at him with a directness that was both challenging and, underneath it, something raw. The look of someone who has been asked a simple question that has just revealed a very complicated answer. "You ask a lot of questions," she said. "Mechanic thing," he said. "You don't just fix what's visibly broken. You ask what the car was doing before it broke, what it sounded like, what changed. Usually the visible problem isn't where the problem actually is." She was quiet for a moment. "You're not talking about cars." "I'm always talking about cars." Something moved at the corner of her mouth. Not quite a smile. Something in that neighborhood. Dinner was the stew Constance had spent the afternoon building, and it was exactly the kind of food that a snowbound lodge full of stranded people needed, heavy and warm, and tasting like something that had been made rather than assembled. Wyatt got Sadie situated at a table near the fireplace with the other Snow Club members, and then, by some gravitational inevitability he didn't entirely plan, ended up sharing a table with Vivian. She ate carefully, the way she did most things. Not slowly, but with attention. She cut the bread into precise pieces. She held her soup spoon the correct way, which Wyatt clocked only because it was so consistent with everything else about her. "Tell me something about mechanics," she said, halfway through dinner. He looked up. "Like what?" "Like, what actually happens when a car overheats? I've always just pulled over and waited and called someone. I never understood what was actually happening." He explained it. Cooling system, coolant circulation, thermostat failure, what the temperature gauge is actually telling you, and why people ignore it until it's too late. She listened with genuine attention, the way she'd listened to the service strategy conversation that morning. She asked 3 follow-up questions, each one more specific than the last. "You're good at explaining things," she said. "Had to get good at it. People bring their cars in, they want to know what happened. If you just tell them it's a thermostat and hand them a bill, they feel cheated. You explain what a thermostat actually does, why it failed, how the whole system depends on it, then they understand what they're paying for." He paused. "People don't resist information. They resist feeling like they're being managed." She looked at him across the table. That's basically the entire problem I have with my board." "Yeah?" "They don't resist the strategy. They resist feeling like I've already made the decision and I'm presenting it to them as a formality." She picked up her spoon and put it down again. "Because I have. Because by the time I'm presenting anything, I've already worked through every variable and I'm confident in the conclusion. And apparently that comes across as, like you're managing them? Like I don't need them." She said it quietly. "Which is not, I do need them. I need their approval, legally, structurally, but I think I've spent years communicating that their judgment is less important than their signature. And that's..." She stopped. "That's a problem I'm not sure I know how to fix." "You start by asking them what they think before you tell them what you've concluded," Wyatt said. "That takes longer. Most things worth doing take longer." She looked at him for a moment. "You're annoyingly consistent," she said. "People tell me that." "Do they mean it as a compliment?" "Not usually, but I sleep fine either way." She laughed. It was small and a little surprised, like it had gotten out before she could review it, but it was real. The kind of laugh that comes from something genuinely landing rather than from politeness. It changed her face in a way that was briefly startling. She looked for a second like someone 10 years younger and a great deal less certain. Then it was gone, and she was Vivian Hartwell again, picking up her soup spoon. But Wyatt had seen it. Sadie fell asleep during dinner, literally in her chair, with a piece of bread still in her hand and her head tipping forward until Wyatt caught her. He carried her upstairs with the practiced ease of a man who has done this hundreds of times, which he had, and tucked her in, and stood over her in the dark for a moment doing what parents do, making sure the breathing was right, making sure she was warm, watching the small rise and fall of her chest with a love that had no manageable size. He went back downstairs. Vivian was still at the table, but the legal pad and laptop were gone. She was just sitting with her wine, still only the second glass he'd seen her have in 2 days, which he'd noted because he'd expected someone in her position to drink more during a situation like this. And looking at the fireplace. He sat back down across from her. "She okay?" Vivian asked. "Out cold. She does this sometimes, runs at full speed and then just stops. Like a toy whose battery dies." "Exactly." Vivian turned the wine glass slowly. "My mother used to say I was the opposite as a kid. I would not sleep. I'd lie in bed and plan things. She'd come in at midnight and I'd be under the covers with a flashlight making lists. Lists of what? Things I was going to do, schools I was going to get into, jobs I was going to have." She said it without any particular sentiment. "I was 7. Ambitious 7-year-old. Anxious 7-year-old, she corrected. "I didn't know the difference at the time." She paused. "I'm not sure I know it now, actually." The fire popped. Someone across the room laughed at something. The couple from earlier, comfortable now, easy with each other the way people get when a crisis gets properly settled. "What was the first thing on the list?" Wyatt asked. "When you were 7, first thing on the list." Vivian thought about it. "Stanford," she said. "I wanted to go to Stanford. I'd read about it somewhere. I don't even remember where. And I decided I was going to go. That was the first thing." "Did you?" Full scholarship, computer science, class of 2014. A beat. So I suppose the list worked. What happened after Stanford? Grad school at Carnegie Mellon, dropped out after a year to start the company. She tapped the base of her glass on the table. My parents were furious. Are they still? No, it's hard to stay furious at someone who's on the cover of Forbes. She said it flatly, not proudly, not bitterly, just as a fact of the specific landscape she'd built. They're proud now. They talk about what I've built at every family dinner. They use it the way people use things that make them feel simultaneously proud and uncomfortable, as a topic that fills the silence. Are you close to your family? She took a sip of wine. We're cordial, she said. We talk on birthdays, major holidays. My mother sends me articles about self-care and sleep hygiene, which I never read. My brother has 2 kids and a house in Tempe, and we have absolutely nothing to talk about. She paused. I used to think that was fine, that it was the cost of the life I'd built, the trade-off. Another pause. I think about that trade-off more lately. What changed? She was quiet for a moment. Outside, the wind had dropped slightly. Not gone, just briefly gathering itself for the next round. I turned 32 in October, she said. I was on a plane from San Francisco to London for a conference, and I realized I'd spent my birthday crossing the Atlantic, and no one I actually cared about knew where I was. My assistant had sent flowers to my apartment. My COO sent a bottle of wine to the hotel in London, and I sat in a business class seat at 32,000 feet and thought. She stopped. What? She looked at the fire. I thought, is this what I worked for? And I didn't have a good answer. Wyatt didn't say anything. He just let it sit there because some things need space rather than a response. I told myself it was the altitude, she said, made everything feel more dramatic than it was. She looked back at him. But I kept thinking about it after I landed. That's the thing about thoughts that are actually true. They don't go away just because you dismiss them. No, Wyatt said. They don't. How did you... She paused, choosing the words carefully. After your wife, when everything changed, how did you figure out what to do next? Wyatt leaned back in his chair. It was a question most people didn't ask him directly, and the ones who did usually wanted a clean answer, a lesson, a framework, a way of packaging grief into something comprehensible. He didn't have one of those. I didn't figure anything out, he said. I just kept doing the next thing. Sadie needed breakfast, so I made breakfast. Sadie needed someone to take her to the park, so I took her. The shop needed to open, so I opened it. And somewhere in all those next things, I stopped having to decide to keep going. I was just going. That sounds exhausting. It was. It still is sometimes. He looked at his coffee. But exhausted is different from empty. Exhausted means you're spending something on something that matters. Empty means you've been spending it on the wrong things and didn't notice until it was gone. Vivian Hartwell said nothing. She was looking at him with the expression of someone who has just heard themselves described with precision they weren't expecting. The company, she started, then stopped. Then, I've been running it for 8 years, building it for 3 before that. 11 years of just the company, just the next thing the company needed. And she pressed her lips together. I don't know if I know how to spend on anything else anymore. I don't know if I remember what the other things are. It was the most honest thing she'd said. He could hear it in the shift in her voice, the way the precise professional cadence dropped out, and something younger and less curated came through. You're not empty, he said. You knew you were lonely on your birthday. You knew what was missing. Empty people don't know that. She looked at him. Her eyes were very dark in the firelight, and she was not, in that moment, the woman on the magazine covers. She was something plainer and more uncomfortable and more real. I don't talk about this, she said. I know. I don't know why I'm... Blizzard, he said, and a room with 2 beds and nowhere to go, and a kid who asks too many questions. He shrugged. People say things when all the escapes are closed. The corner of her mouth moved again. Is that the mechanic's diagnosis? It's the observation of someone who's also stuck here with nothing better to do. She looked at her wine. She looked at the fire. She looked at him. Your daughter thinks I'm lonely, she said. She mentioned that, yeah. She's 6. She pays attention. He paused. I taught her that. Vivian set the wine glass down and sat with her hands folded on the table. Not tightly, not with tension, but with the careful stillness of someone who is holding something together from the inside and would prefer not to make it visible. She's not wrong, Vivian said. Wyatt nodded. No, he said. She's usually not. The fire crackled. The blizzard pressed against the lodge walls, patient and enormous, and utterly indifferent to the specific human difficulties being worked through in that. Across the common room, someone had turned on a radio that got one clear station, old country music, faint and slightly static-ridden, which seemed exactly right. Vivian picked up her wine again. She looked out the dark window at the shapes the snow made in the porch light, wild and formless and constantly changing, as if the air itself had decided it was no longer interested in being still. I haven't told anyone that, she said. The birthday thing. Okay. I'm not sure why I told you. Probably because I'm a mechanic from Denver you'll never see again after the roads open, he said. She looked at him. There was something in his expression, not quite amusement, not quite challenge, that she held for a beat before looking away. Probably, she said. But neither of them fully believed it, and the silence that followed was a different kind than the ones before. Less like absence and more like something on the edge of forming, the way ice forms on still water, slowly, from the outside in, until one morning you wake up and find it solid all the way through. The third day of the blizzard arrived without ceremony. No dramatic shift in weather, no sudden clearing that might have offered false hope. Just the same bone-colored sky and the same relentless wind working the same arguments against the same walls, and 26 people inside Harlan's lodge waking up to the reality that they were, for at least another full day, exactly where they were. The novelty of being stranded had worn off for most of the adults. What replaced it was a particular kind of fatigue, not physical, but the slower, heavier exhaustion that comes from sustained proximity to people you didn't choose, in a space you can't leave, with nothing to do but exist. Wyatt had been awake since 5. He'd made it to 6:15 before giving up on sleep entirely, dressing quietly in the dark while Sadie slept and Vivian lay still on the far bed. He couldn't tell if she was asleep or just lying there the way she sometimes did, eyes open in the dark, running whatever calculations she ran when she thought no one was watching. He'd gone downstairs, gotten coffee from the kitchen where Constance was already at work on breakfast, and sat alone at the table near the window for the better part of an hour, watching the storm and thinking about nothing in particular, which was rare enough for him that he noticed it. The conversation from the night before stayed with him, not any specific line of it, just the texture. The way Vivian had talked about her birthday on the plane. The way she'd said, I don't know if I remember what the other things are, with the flat precision of someone reading a finding from a report about someone else. He'd heard a lot of grief in 4 years. His own, mostly, but also the grief that friends and family brought to him like they thought he might know what to do with it now, having handled so much of his own. He recognized the particular quality of what Vivian carried. It wasn't grief for something lost. It was grief for something she hadn't yet admitted she'd never had. That was harder, in some ways. When something's taken from you, at least you know what you're mourning. Sadie came downstairs at 7 with her hair loose and her purple coat half-zipped, which meant she'd dressed herself in a hurry because something was already on her mind. Can we go outside? She asked. In this? Just on the porch, with the roof. He considered it. The lodge had a covered porch running along the front, wide enough to stand under without getting buried. The temperature was somewhere around 12 degrees, but there was no wind on the south-facing porch side. Bundle up, he said. They stood on the porch for 20 minutes, Sadie with her face tipped up, watching the snow fall in the windless space beneath the roof overhang, Wyatt with his hands wrapped around his coffee mug. She asked him questions about snow, why it was different shapes, why it sometimes fell fast and sometimes slow, why it was white when water was clear. He answered the ones he knew and said he didn't know for the ones he didn't, which she accepted without complaint because he'd taught her early that I don't know from an honest person was worth more than a confident answer from someone guessing. Do you like her? Sadie asked, at some point between a question about ice crystals and a question about avalanches. He looked at her. Who? She gave him the look. the one that communicated with maximum efficiency that she was 6 years old and not a fool. "She's interesting," he said. "That's not what I asked." "Sadie." "I'm just asking." "She's someone we met in a snowstorm," he said carefully. "We don't really know her." "You talked to her for a long time last night." "How do you know that?" "I woke up. You were still downstairs. I watched from the stairs for a minute." She paused. "You were laughing." He looked out at the snow. "Go inside and eat breakfast." She went. But she paused at the door and looked back at him with the expression she'd inherited from her mother, a particular quality of patient, undeceived attention that always made him feel like the younger of the two of them. "She needs a friend," Sadie said. Then she went inside. Wyatt stood on the porch a moment longer. The snow fell. His coffee went cold. He went back inside. Vivian came downstairs at 8:30. She looked like she'd slept better than she had the previous nights. Something slightly less guarded around her eyes, her posture not quite so carefully assembled. She had her hair down, which he'd only seen once before, when she'd first woken up the previous morning. It made her look less like the woman on the magazine covers and more like an ordinary person, which he was increasingly understanding she was, underneath the architecture she'd built around herself. She poured coffee. She came and sat across from him without being invited, which was its own small thing. On the first day, she'd waited for permission. On the second, she'd hesitated. Today, she just sat. "I need to apologize," she said. He looked up from his phone. "For what?" "Yesterday, when I said—" She stopped. "When I implied you wouldn't understand the business strategy conversation. That was condescending." "It was a little. I'm aware." She wrapped both hands around her mug. "I do it automatically. It's a defense mechanism I developed early and haven't fully unlearned. I lead with credential hierarchy because in most rooms that's how you establish—" She caught herself doing it again. "I'm sorry, it was rude." "Apology accepted," he said. "You're not going to argue with me about it?" "No, you're right. It was condescending, and you've acknowledged it. Nothing left to argue about." She looked at him with the expression he was coming to think of as her recalibration face. "Most people would make me work for it." "I'm not interested in making you work for it," he said. "You did something, you recognized it, you said so. That's already more than most people manage." He picked up his coffee. "How'd you sleep?" "Better," she said, with slight surprise, as if this was information she hadn't expected to report. "The wind dropped a little around 3, I think." "Yeah, it'll pick back up. But the eye of the system went through overnight. Should be clearing by tomorrow morning if the forecast holds." She nodded. She looked out the window at the still heavy snow. "So, one more day?" "Probably." Something moved across her face, something complicated, an expression he couldn't fully read, which was not a usual problem for him. With most people, he could tell within the first hour what they were carrying and roughly where it was heaviest. With Vivian, the layers were dense and professionally maintained, and he kept finding new ones. "Is that good or bad?" he asked. "I don't know," she said, which was, he was learning, the most honest thing she ever said. The things she wasn't sure about came out clean and flat. The things she'd decided about came out polished and defended. The difference between them was audible, if you listened right. The morning passed in the communal rhythm that the lodge had developed over 3 days. Breakfast, the slow dispersal into small groups, the fireplace as gravitational center, Sadie and the Snow Club conducting their ongoing and somewhat chaotic governance of the common room's corner table. Around 10, Wyatt found himself in an unexpected conversation with a man named Gerald, who was in his late 50s and had been stranded at the lodge while on his way to visit his adult son in Salida. Gerald was a retired civil engineer who had opinions about mountain road design and who had, at some point in the previous decade, apparently rebuilt a 1967 Mustang Fastback from nothing, which gave him and Wyatt more than enough to talk about for 45 minutes. At some point during this conversation, Wyatt looked up and saw Vivian sitting with Sadie at the corner table. Just the two of them. Sadie appeared to be showing Vivian something, a drawing maybe, or one of the small projects she'd been assembling out of materials she'd found or borrowed. Vivian was looking at it with her full attention, her head slightly tilted, asking what appeared to be genuine questions. He watched for a moment, then went back to talking about the Mustang's suspension rebuild. Later, he'd ask Sadie what they'd talked about. She told me about the first computer program she ever wrote, Sadie said, when she was 12. It was a program that organized her book collection and told her what to read next. She said her mom thought it was weird, but she thought it was the best thing she'd ever done. What did you think? I thought it was pretty cool, Sadie said. I asked her if she remembered what it felt like to make it. She said it felt like magic, like she'd told a machine to understand something, and it did. Sadie paused. She looked really different when she said that. Different how? Happy, Sadie said. Like the real kind, not the polite kind. The afternoon went gray and close, the way mountain winter afternoons do when the temperature drops and the cloud cover thickens and the light goes flat and directionless. By 2 o'clock, the lodge felt like a submarine. Sealed, pressurized, the outside world reduced to a theoretical concept visible only through the portholes of the windows. Vivian had retreated to the suite after lunch with her legal pad, and Wyatt had left her to it. He and Gerald finished their Mustang conversation, and then he spent an hour with Sadie and the Snow Club, which had evolved from an amorphous social entity into something with actual projects. Specifically, Dominic had proposed building a card tower, and Sadie had agreed on the condition that she got to name it, and she had named it the Blizzard Palace, and they were now engaged in the delicate engineering work of making a structure out of playing cards that could survive the footsteps of a 5-year-old who kept walking too close. At 4 in the afternoon, Wyatt went upstairs. Vivian was at the desk, but she wasn't writing. She was sitting with the legal pad in front of her and the pen uncapped and held loosely in her hand, but she was looking at the wall. Not at anything on the wall. Just at the wall, with the specific kind of unfocused stare that happens when your eyes have stopped being the organ you're using. He came in quietly and sat on the edge of his bed and said nothing. He'd learned over 2 days that Vivian did not respond well to being startled out of her interior states and that the right move was to simply exist in the room until she was ready to acknowledge it. She acknowledged it after about 3 minutes. "Can I ask you something?" she said, still looking at the wall. "Sure." "When your wife died." She said it carefully, without flinching from it the way most people flinched. "Did you know right away who you were without her, or did it take time?" He looked at the back of her head. "Why?" "Just answer first." "It took time," he said. "A long time. When you build yourself around a person, around a life that includes a specific person, and then that person is gone. The shape of you doesn't make sense anymore. You've got all these parts that were designed to fit around something that isn't there. It takes a while to figure out what you actually are when you subtract the design." She turned. She looked at him with an expression he hadn't seen before. Not the recalibration face, not the boardroom composure, not the exhausted, polished professional face. Something more open and more frightened in the way that honest fear is more frightening than manufactured confidence. "I think I've done that," she said. "Built myself around something, but it wasn't a person." "The company." "The company," she confirmed, "and the idea of the company. The version of myself that the company required. And somewhere in the last, I don't know, 2 years, maybe 3, I've started to feel like I've been wearing someone else's." She stopped. "No, not someone else's. It's mine. I built it. It fits perfectly. That's the problem." She set the pen down. "When a thing you built fits you perfectly, and you've been wearing it so long that you can't remember what it felt like before, how do you know if it still fits? Or if you've just stopped being able to feel the edges?" Wyatt said nothing for a moment. The storm pushed against the window. "What's happened?" he asked. "In the last couple of years." She looked at her hands on the desk. "Growth," she said. "Real growth. The company doubled in revenue in 18 months, 2 acquisitions. The IPO is on the table for next year. Everything I built it for is happening right on schedule." She paused. "And I wake up at 4 in the morning and I lie there and I don't feel anything about it. Nothing? Not nothing. I feel—" She searched for it. "I feel a kind of mechanical satisfaction, like when a process runs correctly. Like, yes, the outputs match the projected inputs, the system is functioning within expected parameters, but that's not—" She pressed her lips together. "I used to love it." I used to wake up at 4 in the morning excited, not anxious, excited. The way you wake up when you're a kid on the day of something you've been waiting for. And I can tell the difference between what it used to feel like and what it feels like now, and I don't know how to get back to the first thing. Wyatt leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Can I say something that might be hard to hear? You've been doing that since you knocked on my table in the lobby, she said. Don't ask permission now. You succeeded, he said. You built the thing, and somewhere along the way you built a version of yourself that was specifically engineered to build it. Disciplined, strategic, resilient to setbacks, capable of operating at a scale most people can't manage. You optimized yourself. He paused. And now the thing is built, or close enough. And the version of you that was built to build it is still running, still optimizing, still operating in crisis mode because crisis mode is the only mode she knows. And the problem isn't the company. He paused again. The problem is that you don't know what Vivian Hartwell wants when she's not building something. She stared at him. Her jaw was set. He could see her wanting to find the rebuttal, the counterargument, the data point that disproved the analysis. He watched her look for it and not find it. That's a significant claim, she said, based on 2 days of 48 hours in a small room with someone tells you more than 6 months of quarterly meetings, he said. You know that. She was quiet. Then, yes. The word came out smaller than anything else she'd said. Not soft. Vivian Hartwell didn't do soft exactly, but quieter, less armored. You said you don't know what makes you happy anymore, he continued. That's not a small thing. He stopped and chose the next words with care. Most people I know would do anything to avoid sitting with that question. They'd fill every hour with noise and work and screens and obligations so they never have to hear it. And I think that's what you've been doing for a while. And the blizzard took all that away, and now the question is just sitting here in this room with us, and you can't outrun it because the road's closed. Vivian looked out the window. The snow was still falling, but slower now, the late afternoon light giving it a gray-silver quality, like ash. I'm 32 years old, she said. I have more money than I know what to do with. I have a company that half the industry envies and the other half is trying to imitate. I have everything I planned for when I was 7 years old making lists under the covers. She stopped. And the honest answer to the honest question you keep asking, no, I am not happy. I haven't been happy in, I don't know how long, long enough that I stopped noticing I wasn't. The room held it. Wyatt didn't try to fix it. He'd learned, through 4 years of carrying his own version of an honest answer to an honest question, that some things don't need to be fixed in the moment they're admitted. Sometimes they just need to be admitted and then sat with, in the presence of another person who isn't going to flinch. The lists worked, he said finally, every item on the list. But the list was made by a 7-year-old who was scared, and 7-year-olds who are scared want safety and proof and achievement because those are the things that feel like they'll make the fear stop. He looked at her. Did the fear stop? She opened her mouth, closed it. No, she said. Because achievements don't fix fear, he said. They just give it a new address. She turned from the window and looked at him, and for a moment her face was stripped of everything professional and polished and constructed, and she looked exactly like what she was. A person who had worked extraordinarily hard in the wrong direction and had only just started to understand the scale of what that cost. I don't know how to do this differently, she said. I don't know what it looks like. The other version. Nobody does, Wyatt said. You just start by admitting you're lost, and then you take the next step, and then the one after that. Same as anything. You make it sound simple. It's not simple. It's just not complicated either. He straightened up. Complicated is the thing people tell themselves when simple is too hard to face. She looked at him for a long, unguarded moment. Then she looked down at the legal pad, at the restructuring proposal she'd been working on for 3 days. I built an empire, she said, almost to herself. Yeah, he said, and forgot to build a life. He didn't confirm it. He didn't have to. She'd arrived at it herself, and things that arrive that way tend to stay. Dinner that evening was quieter than the previous nights. Not uncomfortable. Quieter in the way that spaces get quiet after something true has been said and the air hasn't finished processing it yet. Vivian ate without her legal pad for the first time since they'd arrived. She talked with Constance about where Constance had grown up. Western Kansas, she said, a farm town outside Dodge City. And she listened the way she'd listened to Wyatt explain the car's cooling system, with full attention, asking the kind of follow-up questions that indicated she was actually tracking and not just waiting for her turn. Sadie ate her stew and watched Vivian with the focused interest of a naturalist observing something that had started doing unexpected things. "You're different tonight," Sadie said. "Sadie," Wyatt said. "She is, though," Sadie said. Vivian looked at Sadie. "Different how?" "Quieter," Sadie said. "But not the bad kind of quiet. The kind where you've thought about something for a long time and you finally figured it out, and now you don't need to keep thinking about it." Vivian stared at her. "You're 6 years old." "I know," Sadie said. "Do you want some more bread?" After dinner, they ended up on the covered porch, all three of them. It had been Sadie's idea. She wanted to see the stars, and the clouds had thinned just enough in the past hour to make that technically possible. The temperature had dropped to 8 degrees, but with the porch roof and no wind, it was manageable if you were dressed for it, which Wyatt always was, and which he'd made sure Sadie was. Vivian came out because Sadie had asked her directly, and she hadn't found a way to say no that didn't feel worse than the cold. She stood with her arms crossed, not against the chill. She'd borrowed one of the lodge's spare wool blankets and had it around her shoulders. But in her own specific way, the way someone stands when they've recently been made vulnerable and haven't entirely re-established their footing. She stood between Wyatt and the porch railing and looked up at the strip of sky visible between the cloud cover, where 3 stars were showing. "I can't find any constellations with 3 stars, Sadie announced. "You need more stars," Wyatt told her. "Obviously." Vivian looked up. "That one in the middle," she said, "is Rigel, part of Orion's belt. The other 2 aren't his belt stars, but Rigel is the brightest star in the Orion constellation. Blue supergiant." Sadie stared at her. "How do you know that?" "I went through an astronomy phase when I was about 8. She kept looking at the star. "I wanted to be an astronomer for about 4 months, before I decided I liked computers better." "Why did you like computers better?" "Because I could talk to them," Vivian said. "And they'd answer. The stars didn't answer." Sadie considered this seriously. "Maybe they do, and we just can't hear it." Vivian looked down at her. "Maybe," she said. They stood in the cold for another few minutes, the 3 of them watching the 3 visible stars and the slow movement of cloud cover across the dark sky. Sadie eventually pressed herself against Wyatt's side, and he put his arm around her without looking down, the automatic physics of a parent and a child who have spent 6 years calibrating their weight against each other. Vivian watched this from 2 feet away. Wyatt felt her watching, the same way you feel temperature change in a room. Not visible, just present. "She has her mother's eyes," Vivian said quietly, not a question. He looked down at Sadie, who was watching the sky and not paying attention to them. "Yeah," he said. "Do you see her when you look at Sadie?" "Every day." "Does that make it harder?" He thought about it honestly, the way he tried to think about everything. "It used to. First year, it was... Yeah. Every time Sadie did something that reminded me, it felt like a hand on a bruise. Now it just feels like..." He paused. "Like she's still here in the parts that matter most. Like she didn't leave completely." He paused again. "I know that might sound like I'm not dealing with it." "It sounds like you are," Vivian said. "Differently than I would. But I'm not sure my way is better." "Your way of dealing with loss?" "My way of dealing with anything," she said. "I make systems. I make them efficient. I make them clean. And I put everything that doesn't fit the system somewhere. I don't have to look at it." She looked out at the dark mountain shapes barely visible at the edge of the porch light. "My father had a stroke last year. Minor. He recovered fully. But for about 4 hours, before I knew how serious it was, I was..." She stopped. "I was very afraid. And then he was fine, and I flew out for 2 days, and I helped my mother set up all the medical follow-up appointments, and I organized everything, and I flew back to San Francisco, and I went back to work. And I never..." She stopped again. "You never what?" I never called him and just talked, she said. Just called and said I was scared. I flew out and managed the crisis because that's what I know how to do. And then I left. The blanket shifted around her shoulders. He called me in November to talk about a documentary he'd watched about the space program. I was in a meeting. I told him I'd call him back. She looked at the stars. I haven't. Wyatt said nothing. That's 7 months, she said. He probably still wants to talk about the documentary. She looked at him. Something moved across her face. Surprise and grief, and something adjacent to relief all at once, compressed into a second. Probably, she said. Call him when the service window comes tomorrow. She didn't answer immediately. Then, I don't know what to say. After 7 months. Say you saw a star tonight called Rigel, and you thought about the documentary. She was quiet. In the cold, her breath came in small, visible clouds, steady, even, the breath of someone trying very hard to hold their shape while something inside was shifting. I've been running for 11 years, she said. Not to him, not exactly. More the way people say the things they've finally admitted, out into the air, to make them solid. I know, he said. I don't know what stopping looks like. You don't have to stop, he said. You just have to slow down enough to see where you're going. She looked at him. In the porch light, with the blanket around her shoulders and the cold making everything simpler than it usually was, she looked exactly like herself. Not the version she'd constructed and not the version the blizzard had stripped down to, but something in between that might be closer to the actual answer. I'm angry, she said. At myself. I'm angry that it took a snowstorm and a... She caught herself. And a mechanic, he said. I was going to say a stranger. Same thing. No, she said. Not the same thing. She held his gaze for a moment, steady and serious in the way she did everything. Not anymore. The cold settled. Sadie had fallen into a half-doze against Wyatt's side, held upright mostly by his arm and the iron stubbornness of a child who refuses to admit she's tired. We should take her inside, Vivian said. Yeah. He shifted Sadie, who mumbled something indistinct. You coming in? Vivian looked at the 3 stars one more time. In a minute. He took Sadie inside. He got her upstairs and into bed with the deft efficiency of a man who has performed this operation in the dark more times than he could count. He sat on the edge of her mattress for a moment while she settled, her breathing going deep and even within 2 minutes. He went back to the window and looked down at the porch. Vivian was still there, standing at the railing in the cold, looking up, not at her phone, not at anything that needed managing, just up at the small strip of dark sky and the 3 visible stars and whatever calculations she was running on herself in the private arithmetic of a very quiet moment. He watched her for a little while. Then he stepped back from the window and gave her the solitude. Some things needed to happen without an audience. She came back inside a half hour later. He was sitting up reading, or pretending to. She came in and hung the borrowed blanket on the chair back and sat down on her bed and looked at the nightstand for a moment. Then she picked up her phone and opened her contacts and found a number listed as Dad, home. She sat with the phone in her hand for a long time. The service is bad at night, Wyatt said quietly from behind his book. I know, she said. I'm not calling now. I just wanted to find it. She looked at the number. I haven't looked at it in a while. Okay. She set the phone on the nightstand with the contact still open. She lay back on the bed, still in her clothes, looking at the ceiling. The blizzard's going to stop tomorrow, she said. Probably by morning. And then we all go back. Yeah. She was quiet for a moment. I don't want to go back, she said. She said it simply, without drama, without any of the careful management she applied to most things. Just a plain statement of a plain feeling, the way Sadie would have said it. That's new. I've never not wanted to go back before. Wyatt put his book down. What do you want instead? She looked at the ceiling. I want to figure out what I missed, she said. I want to... She stopped, then started again. I want to call my father and listen to him talk about a space documentary for as long as he wants to talk. I want to go see my brother's kids before they're too old to want to meet me. I want to sleep 8 hours and not feel guilty about it. She paused. I want to remember what it felt like to write that first program at 12, that thing I told Sadie about, that feeling of magic. She turned her head and looked at him. I want to care about what I do the way I used to care. Those things are still available, he said. Are they? You didn't use them up. You just stopped going to them. He looked at her steadily. The door's still there. You just have to turn around. She looked at the ceiling again. Outside, the wind had gone almost completely quiet. The first real quiet in 3 days, the specific hush that comes after a long storm when the air finally runs out of urgency. I'm scared, she said. It came out clean and clear, the way honest fear does. Of what it means. If I change direction now, what people will think, what I'll lose. You're already losing, he said. Just slowly enough that you've been able to call it something else. She didn't argue. She closed her eyes. Wyatt, yeah. Thank you, she said, for not letting me get away with it. He didn't ask what she meant. He knew. He turned off his light. Outside the window, between the retreating clouds, the stars were coming through. Not 3 anymore. More. The whole spread of them, sharp and cold and enormous. The way they only appear at high elevation after a long storm has scrubbed the sky clean of everything that was obscuring them. Vivian lay in the dark with her phone on the nightstand and her father's number still on the screen and the whole weight of what she'd finally admitted settling around her. Not like a collapse, but like an arrival. The specific and exhausting relief of a person who has been carrying something heavy a very long way and has finally, in a small room in the Colorado mountains, set it down. She slept. The full, real sleep of someone whose body has been waiting for permission, and the storm, at last, went quiet. Wyatt woke to silence. Not the aggressive, pressurized silence of a storm holding its breath between gusts. Actual silence. The kind that has weight and texture, that you can feel against your skin the same way you feel a change in temperature. He lay still for a moment with his eyes open and listened to it, and what he heard was nothing. No wind, no rattling glass, no creak of the building absorbing lateral force. Just the quiet particular to high elevation on a clear morning, when the air is so cold and so still that sound seems to travel differently, like it's uncertain whether to move at all. He sat up and looked at the window. Blue sky. Not the flat bone-colored gray of the past 3 days, but actual blue. The specific, deep, saturated blue that only exists at altitude. The kind that makes the mountains look painted rather than real. The sun was low and sharp, cutting across the snow-covered landscape and turning everything it touched into something that required squinting. The blizzard was over. Sadie was still asleep, face down with one arm hanging off the mattress. Vivian's bed was empty, which surprised him. It was barely 7, and every other morning she'd been the last one up. He dressed quietly and went downstairs. She was on the front porch. Not standing this time, but sitting on the top step with her knees pulled up and both hands around a mug of coffee, looking out at the mountain landscape with an expression he hadn't seen on her before. Not working, not calculating, just looking. The way a person looks at something they're actually seeing instead of processing. He got coffee and came out and sat beside her on the step. Not too close, leaving a foot of cold morning air between them. Roads are open? He asked. Dale says the county plows came through around 4, she said. The highway's passable. He thinks it'll be fully clear by mid-morning. He nodded. They sat for a moment with their coffee and the silence that had replaced the storm and the view that deserved more attention than either of them could fully give it at 7 in the morning. I called my dad, Vivian said. He looked at her. Last night, around 1. The service was actually decent. She wrapped both hands tighter around the mug. He picked up on the second ring, which he always picks up on the second ring. I don't know why I thought that detail would be the thing that got me, but it was. She paused. He said, Viv, just that. Just my name, the way he says it. She stopped again. Wyatt waited. We talked for 2 hours, she said. About the documentary. Yes, he still wanted to talk about it. It was about the Hubble telescope, apparently fascinating, and about my mother's garden, which she's been redesigning, and about my nephew, who is apparently going through a phase where he only answers to Captain Rex, which is a character from some animated... She stopped. exhaled something that was not quite a laugh but was close. 2 hours. And at the end he said, "I'm glad you called, kiddo." And he said it the way you say something you've been waiting a long time to say. Her jaw moved. 7 months. I wasted 7 months. You didn't waste them, Wyatt said. I did. No, you weren't ready to call. He looked out at the mountains. You're ready now. That's what matters. She turned her head and looked at him with the expression she'd worn on the porch the night before, stripped of the professional architecture, just the person underneath it, who was considerably more complicated and considerably more real. You really believe that? That the timing matters more than the gap? I think people waste a lot of energy punishing themselves for the gap when they could be using it to build what comes after. He drank his coffee. The gap is a fact. What you do next is still a choice. She looked back at the mountains. The sun was climbing and the snow on the peaks was starting to do things with the light that made them look almost molten. Golds and oranges, and a deep rose color along the ridgelines that lasted about 20 minutes before the sun got too high and the colors went back to white. I made some other decisions last night, she said. Like what? I'm going to step back from day-to-day operations. Not permanently, but... She paused, organizing it the way she organized everything. The professional precision still intact, but running on different fuel than it had 4 days ago. I have a COO who is fully capable of running the company. Marcus Teller. He's been with me for 6 years. He knows every system. He's actually better than I am at internal management. I've been holding on to control I don't need to hold because letting go felt like... She stopped. Like admitting you weren't necessary? Like admitting the company could survive without me. She said it plainly. Which is a terrible thing to admit, because you build something and you put everything into it, and the idea that it could function without you is both the proof that you built it right and the most threatening thing you can imagine. So you kept making yourself necessary. I kept creating situations that required me. She turned her mug in her hands. New initiatives, new pivots, new crises. If there was always a fire, I always had to be the one holding the hose. A pause. Marcus pointed that out to me once, about 18 months ago. I dismissed it. I told him he didn't understand the demands of the role. She paused. He understood them perfectly. I just didn't want to hear it. Are you going to tell him he was right? I sent him an email at 2 a.m, she said. 3 sentences. You were right about the fire thing. We should talk when I'm back. Start thinking about what you'd need to take point on daily ops. She glanced at him sideways. He replied in 4 minutes, which means he was also awake at 2 a.m, which means I've built a company that has a serious problem with its leadership culture. Also fixable, Wyatt said. Also fixable, she agreed. They sat in the cold morning air while the mountains did what mountains do, remained enormous and entirely unconcerned with human decisions. A bird appeared somewhere in the trees at the edge of the property, its call sharp and clear in the post-storm silence. Sadie would want to know what kind it was. Wyatt didn't know, but he'd look it up. What will you do? Vivian asked. With the time, when you get back. Open the shop on Monday. Take Sadie to her piano lesson on Tuesday because she's been learning hot cross buns for 6 weeks, and I've promised her I'll actually listen this time instead of doing inventory in my head while she plays. He thought about it. Maybe call my sister. I've been putting that off too. Is it complicated with your sister? She wants me to move closer. She lives in Fort Collins. She's got 3 kids and a husband who keeps offering to get me a job in some kind of corporate fleet maintenance thing, and he stopped. It's not complicated. I just haven't had the energy to explain to her that the shop is mine, and Denver is home, and I'm not looking for a rescue. I'm just living my life. She worries about you. She does. And I understand why. I've just gotten bad at letting people worry about me without either fixing it for them or withdrawing from it entirely. Vivian looked at him. You're not as simple as you present, she said. Nobody is. You present very simply. On purpose, he said. When you run a shop and you're raising a kid alone, you learn fast that people respond better to confidence than uncertainty, even when you've got both. So you lead with the confidence and you work out the uncertainty at 4 in the morning. At 4 in the morning, she repeated, when the shop is quiet. She looked at him for a moment. You said you have trouble sleeping. Some nights. What do you do? Go to the shop, work on something. There's almost always something that needs attention. He paused. It helps to have something your hands can fix, even when the thing that's actually wrong isn't a mechanical problem. Vivian nodded slowly, like she was adding this to a file somewhere. I sit in my office, she said, at 4 in the morning, in the dark, just thinking, running through everything that's in motion, everything that could go wrong. She paused. That's not the same thing at all. No, he said, it's not. The bird called again from the trees. Above the lodge, 2 tracks of vapor from an airplane crossed the sky, travelers going somewhere, which felt both ordinary and slightly strange from where they were sitting. I want to walk, Vivian said. She set her mug down on the step. Into the town. Dale mentioned there's a main street about a mile down the road. He glanced at her. It'll be cold. The road won't be fully clear. I know. She looked at her hands. I want to walk anyway. I feel like I've been inside a very small space for a very long time, and not just since Friday. He understood that. Sadie's going to want to come, he said. I know that too. They woke Sadie at 8 with the news that the storm was over and there was a town to explore, which produced the specific kind of 6-year-old acceleration that suggested she had been waiting, even in sleep, for precisely this development. She was dressed in under 4 minutes, which was a personal record, and was on the porch with her boots on and her purple coat zipped all the way to the chin before Wyatt had finished his second cup of coffee. The walk into town took 40 minutes over roads that were plowed but not dry, the packed snow compressing under their boots with a sound like styrofoam. Sadie walked in the center between Wyatt and Vivian and narrated a continuous and somewhat exhausting commentary on everything she observed. The way the snow sat on fence posts, the color of a frozen creek they crossed on a wooden bridge, a mailbox shaped like a bass guitar, 3 horses in a field standing close together in the cold. They're keeping each other warm, she said about the horses. That's what horses do in winter, Wyatt said. People should do that more, Sadie said with perfect logic, and walked on. Vivian said nothing, but Wyatt caught her face in profile as Sadie moved ahead. That open, unmanaged expression she'd been wearing since the morning, which was becoming less surprising and more just the way she looked when she forgot to be the other version of herself. The town was called Halcyon, population 1,100, and it had the specific character of a mountain town that knows exactly what it is and has no ambitions to be anything else. 1 main street, 6 blocks long, with a hardware store and a diner and a small grocery, and a shop that sold outdoor equipment, and one that seemed to sell exclusively things made of elk antler, which Sadie found fascinating and Vivian found confusing. The diner was called Ruby's, and it was open because mountain diners are always open the day after a blizzard. That's when they're most needed. It was warm and full of the smell of bacon grease and coffee and something sweet baking in the back, and every table was occupied by people with the slightly dazed quality of the post-storm, working through meals with the appreciation of people who hadn't been sure what the roads would look like when they woke up. They got the last available table, a corner booth with vinyl seats patched with electrical tape, and a window that looked out onto the main street where the plow trucks were still making passes. A woman in her 50s named Bev took their order. Pancakes for Sadie, scrambled eggs and toast for Wyatt, and for Vivian, after a pause in which she looked at the menu with the focus of someone making a significant decision. The full short stack with bacon and orange juice. When the pancakes arrived, Sadie immediately began applying syrup in a quantity that Wyatt monitored with paternal concern and then decided to let go because they were on vacation, technically, and some things needed to be enjoyed without supervision. Vivian ate her pancakes the same way she'd eaten the stew the night before, with actual attention, not absently. She put her phone face down on the table without being asked. "These are really good," she said, after the first few bites. She said it with a slightly surprised quality, as if she'd been expecting to grade them and had instead just experienced them. "Bev's been making them since 1987, said an older man in the next booth, who had apparently been listening. He had a white beard and a Denver Broncos cap, and the easy conversational license of a small-town regular. She uses buttermilk and a little vanilla. Won't say what else? I'll figure it out, Vivian said. The man raised his coffee cup to her. Good luck. 37 years nobody has. Sadie looked at Vivian. Do you cook? No, Vivian said. Not really. I have a kitchen in my apartment that I think came with the place. Dad cooks, Sadie said. He's really good at eggs and chili, and one time he made a birthday cake and it fell apart, but it tasted exactly right. That's the important part, Vivian said. That's what he said. Sadie pointed at Wyatt with her fork. He always says it's about the taste, not the look. Good philosophy, Vivian said. He has a lot of those, Sadie said. Philosophies. Some of them are pretty good. Wyatt looked at the window. Are you done discussing my philosophies? Almost, Sadie said, and ate a large piece of pancake. Vivian was smiling, a real one, not the brief, surprised smile from the Scrabble game, but something more settled, with more room in it. It changed her face the same way, but less suddenly this time, like a light being turned up slowly rather than switched on. After breakfast, they walked the length of the main street, which took about 20 minutes at Sadie's pace because she stopped at everything. The outdoor equipment shop had a window display of snowshoes, which Sadie decided she needed to own. The elk antler store was run by a man named Doug, who had 3 dogs, and who gave Sadie a small piece of carved antler with a bird etched into it, because she asked, honestly and directly, whether he'd made it himself and how. Vivian watched Sadie with Doug, the total absence of self-consciousness, the genuine curiosity, the way she listened to him explain the carving process with the same focused attention she gave to everything, and then looked at Wyatt. How did she get like that? She asked. Like what? Just open. She's completely open. Every person she meets, she treats like they might be the most interesting person she's encountered. Because to her they might be, Wyatt said. I never told her some people were more worth talking to than others. I figured she'd sort it out herself. And? She sorted it out. She decided everyone's worth talking to. I'm not sure she's wrong. Vivian was quiet for a moment. I decided the opposite, she said. Not consciously, but... She watched Sadie ask Doug if she could try carving something, which Doug was apparently agreeable to. In business, you learn fast which conversations are worth your time, which people have value to what you're building, and you get very efficient about it, very filtered. And outside business? Outside business, I don't really... She stopped. I applied the same filter without realizing it. She watched Sadie fumble with the small carving tool under Doug's careful supervision. I don't know what I missed. You're not missing it right now, he said. She looked at him, then back at Sadie. No, she said. I'm not. They found a bench on the main street, outside the hardware store, in a patch of sunlight that had enough strength in it to feel genuinely warm when you sat still and let it work. Sadie was inside Doug's shop for another 20 minutes. He'd apparently decided she was a worthy apprentice, so Wyatt and Vivian sat on the bench with the postcard mountain street in front of them and the kind of mid-morning quiet that only exists in small towns after large storms. Can I ask you something? Vivian said. You've been asking things for 3 days, he said. Don't stop now. After your wife. She said it carefully, the way she always approached the subject. Not tiptoeing around it, but with care, the way you step on ice. When did you know you were going to be okay? Not fine, just okay. He thought about it honestly. About a year in. Sadie said something. He paused. She was 3, maybe 3.5. We were at a park, just a regular park near the house. We went almost every week. And she was on the swings. And she said, "Push me higher, Daddy." And I did. And she laughed. That specific laugh she has. You've heard it. He glanced at Vivian, who nodded. And I thought, she's happy. Right now, in this specific moment, she is completely happy. And I realized that was something I could do. I couldn't fix what happened. I couldn't make any of the big things right. But I could push her on a swing high enough to make her laugh, and that was... He stopped. That was enough to keep going. And then the next enough came, and the next one after that. Vivian was looking at him with steady attention. The mistake people make, he continued, is waiting for some big sign that they're going to be okay, some moment where everything resolves and they feel fine. That doesn't come. What comes is a series of small okays, small enough moments that you almost miss them. And if you're paying attention, you collect them, and eventually you have enough of them that okay starts to feel like the natural state. She was quiet for a moment. I've been waiting, she said, for the big sign. The moment where the company reaches a certain size, or the revenue hits a certain number, or the IPO is... She stopped. I've been treating it like a destination. Like when I get there, I'll feel the way I thought I'd feel when I started. And instead, every destination becomes the new departure point. She looked down the mountain street. You hit the goal and immediately the next goal presents itself, which felt like growth. But looking at it now, it just looks like I couldn't stop. Like the stopping was what I was actually afraid of. What happens when you stop? She was quiet for a long moment, long enough that he thought she wasn't going to answer. And then, I'd have to sit with what I've missed, she said. I'd have to actually look at it. And that's worse than the running? She looked at him sidelong. You know it is. You already know the answer to that question. I know what I think. I want to know what you think. She turned to face forward at the snow-covered street and the mountains behind it, and the ordinary, specific beauty of a small Colorado town on a clear winter morning. No, she said. Sitting with it is not worse than the running. It's harder, but it's not worse. She paused. I think the running was worse, actually. I just couldn't see it from inside the running. A truck went by slowly, chains still on, crunching the snow. The driver waved at no one in particular, the reflex of mountain town courtesy. What will you actually do differently? Wyatt asked. Not in theory, concretely. She appreciated the precision of the question. He could see it. The slight forward lean, the way she engaged with specificity, the way she engaged with Scrabble tiles. Take 2 weeks, she said. At minimum. Away from the company, let Marcus run it. Go see my family. Go see my brother in Tempe. Meet my nephew who's going through the Captain Rex phase. A small pause. Call people I should have called. Rebuild. She thought about the word. Repair. Some things that need repair. And after the 2 weeks? Come back to the company differently. Not as the person who has to hold the whole thing or it falls. As the person who built something strong enough to be held by more than one set of hands. She straightened. I need to stop confusing leadership with control. They're not the same thing. No, he said. They're not. How do you know that? You run a shop with 4 employees, he said. But same principle. The first year I had anyone working for me, I couldn't leave the shop. If I was gone for an hour, I was calling to check in. If something went sideways, I needed to be the one who fixed it. He looked at his hands. Danny, he was my first hire. Been with me 6 years now. He pulled me aside one day and said, Boss, either you trust me to do this or you don't. If you don't, pay me accordingly. If you do, stop calling. He paused. I stopped calling. And the shop ran fine. Better, actually. Because Danny had ways of doing things that were different from mine, and some of them were better, and I wouldn't have known that if I'd kept overriding him. Vivian absorbed this. I've overridden Marcus approximately, she did the math in her head, a lot, in 6 years. Tell him that too. The 2 in the morning email didn't say that. So send another one. She looked at him. You make it sound very simple. I've said before, it's not simple, but it's not complicated either. She finished the sentence for him. You have one of those, a saying. It's not a saying, it's just true. Most of your sayings are just true things you say like they're obvious. She looked down at her hands. They're not obvious, or they are, but most people never... They stay in the complicated and never get to the simple. Including you, especially me. She looked up. I've spent 11 years in the complicated. I got very good at it. Comfortable even. Comfortable in the complicated is a dangerous place. Because complicated feels like sophistication. It feels like proof of how serious and important everything is. And simple feels like giving up, like you've missed something. She paused. But you haven't missed something. You've seen through it. He nodded. That's it exactly. Sadie came out of the antler shop with her piece of carved wood, which now had some additional scratches on it that she was calling her own contribution to the bird design. Doug stood in the doorway and waved. He said, "I have natural talent," Sadie reported. He was being kind, Wyatt said. He said it twice, Sadie said. People only say something twice if they mean it. Vivian looked at Sadie. Where did you get that? My dad says it. Sadie examined her carving. He says, if someone compliments you once it might be politeness, but twice means they thought about it. Wyatt looked at Vivian. I say things twice when I mean them, he confirmed. I've noticed, she said. They had lunch at Ruby's, a soup this time, because the temperature had dropped back toward the single digits as the afternoon came on, and soup was the correct response. Bev brought it without ceremony and refilled their coffee twice without being asked, which was the specific hospitality of a diner that has been doing this long enough to know what people need before they ask. Sadie ate half her soup and then put her head down on her folded arms on the table and went to sleep, which she did occasionally in public and without self-consciousness, and which always produced the same reaction in people around her, a kind of collective softening, the way sleeping children affect the adults nearby. Vivian looked at her across the table. She trusts everywhere, Vivian said quietly. She just closes her eyes and goes to sleep wherever she is. She always has, Wyatt said, from when she was a baby. My wife used to say she was born trusting the world. He looked at Sadie's sleeping face. I've tried to give her reasons to keep doing that. You have, Vivian said simply. He looked up. You have, she said again. I've watched her for 3 days. She's whole, whatever that means for a person. She's not performing anything. She's just herself, all the way through. She paused. That doesn't come from nowhere. That's something you gave her. He was quiet. It was the kind of thing people said occasionally, and he usually deflected it, because taking credit for Sadie felt like claiming credit for sunlight. She'd come that way. He'd just tried not to ruin it. But from Vivian, who had spent 3 days saying exactly what she thought without ornamentation, it landed differently. Thank you, he said. She nodded. She looked back at Sadie. I've been thinking about what I want the next version to look like, she said. The next version of how I operate. Yeah? I want it to involve more of this, she said. Not diners specifically, but this. She gestured at the table, the sleeping Sadie, the soup, the window with the mountain street outside. Being somewhere. Actually being in the place I'm in instead of moving through it on the way to somewhere else. That's a good want, he said. It's a simple want. Yeah? See, she said. Simple. He smiled at that. She saw it and looked down at her coffee. Wyatt, she said. Yeah. When you go back to Denver, to the shop, to your regular life, she said it carefully. Will this have mattered? In a week, in a month? Will this have mattered to you? He looked at her. She was watching him with the steady directness she always watched him with, but underneath it was something less armored than usual. A question that was asking more than it was asking. Yes, he said, without qualification. This will have mattered. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she nodded, once the way she nodded when she'd registered something she was going to keep. She picked up her coffee. Good, she said. They walked back to the lodge in the early afternoon, Sadie awake again and restored to full operational capacity, narrating the return journey with equal intensity to the walkout. The sun was lower and the shadows were long and blue across the snow, and the mountains in the late light had that particular solemnity of large things at the end of the day when the scale of them becomes harder to dismiss. At the lodge, most of the other stranded guests were preparing to leave, cars being loaded, farewells being exchanged with the warmth that develops between strangers who've shared a few days of involuntary intimacy. Gerald shook Wyatt's hand and gave Sadie a $20 bill for absolutely no apparent reason, which she accepted with gracious bewilderment. Dominic found Sadie and they played one final round of Scrabble that Vivian declined to join, sitting instead in the chair by the fireplace with her phone and making 2 phone calls, one that lasted 8 minutes and one that lasted 22. When she came back to where Wyatt was sitting, she looked like someone who'd put down something heavy and was still feeling the absence of the weight. "Marcus," she said, "and my brother. Captain Rex's dad. His actual name is Joel." She sat down. "We talked for 20 minutes. He invited me for Christmas. First time he's invited me in 3 years. A pause. I said yes. Good. He seemed surprised I said yes. She looked at the fire. That's on me. Also fixable, Wyatt said. Also fixable, she agreed. Dinner was quieter that evening. The lodge had emptied significantly, and the people who remained were mostly those leaving in the morning rather than that evening. Constance made a simple pasta with garlic and olive oil and whatever she had left in the kitchen, which was exactly right. Sadie fell asleep again at the table, this time with a crayon still in her hand, mid-drawing of what appeared to be a horse in the snow. Wyatt carried her upstairs. Vivian came up after, and they moved through the suite with the efficiency of people who had shared a space long enough to know each other's rhythms. He turned off the overhead light when she sat down to write. She kept her typing quiet when Sadie's breathing deepened. They passed the small bottle of hand lotion on the bathroom shelf without discussion or ceremony. At some point, Wyatt put down his book and looked at the ceiling. I haven't done this in a while, he said. Done what? Sat in a room with someone that wasn't Sadie and not wanted to be somewhere else. He said it simply, without drama, the way he said things he meant. There was a pause. Me neither, Vivian said. The lamp on her side of the room cast everything in warm, low light. Outside, the mountains were dark shapes against a sky full of stars, all of them visible now, the full spread of them, the Milky Way faintly visible in the blackest part of the sky between the peaks. I'm going to miss this, she said, not sentimentally, just as a fact. The room or the company? A pause. The company. He looked at the ceiling. Yeah, he said. Me too. The word landed and stayed there, honest and slightly heavy, the way honest things that matter are heavy. Neither of them said anything else. The lamp clicked off. Sadie breathed in the deep, unworried rhythm of a child who trusts the world. Outside, the mountains stood in the dark exactly as they'd stood for 10,000 years before any of them had arrived and would stand for 10,000 years after, indifferent and enormous, and somehow, in the way enormous and different things sometimes are, deeply comforting. Wyatt closed his eyes. In the morning, they would pack their bags and settle with Dale and load the truck and drive back down the mountain to the highway, back toward Denver and San Francisco, and all the specific responsibilities and lives that waited for them there, unchanged and certain and full of demands. But morning was still hours away, and right now, in the last night of the storm's aftermath, in a small lodge in the Colorado Rockies, 3 people who had not planned to be in each other's lives were simply breathing in the same room, in the dark. And that was enough. It was, in fact, more than enough. It was exactly the kind of small okay that Wyatt had told Vivian about, the kind you almost miss, the kind that doesn't announce itself, the kind that you only recognize later as the moment when the direction started to change. He would recognize it later. But for now, he just let it be what it was and slept. The morning they left Harlan's lodge, nobody said much. That was the thing about departures from places where something real had happened. The talking was mostly done, and what remained was the specific discomfort of returning to ordinary life while carrying something that didn't belong to ordinary life yet. Wyatt loaded the truck while Sadie said goodbye to every person remaining in the lodge with the thoroughness of a diplomat concluding a state visit. She hugged Constance for a long time. She gave Dominic the carved antler bird because she decided he needed it more than she did, which he accepted with the slightly stunned expression of a child who had not anticipated this level of generosity from a 6-year-old he'd known for 3 days. She shook Dale's hand. Vivian settled her bill, carried her own bag to her rental car, a silver SUV that had survived the storm buried to its door handles in the lodge parking lot and had been partially excavated by Wyatt before she'd come out to help, working beside him in the cold without being asked. and stood at the open driver's door for a moment looking at the mountains. Sadie came to stand beside her. "Are you sad?" Sadie asked. Vivian looked down at her. "A little," she said. "Are you?" "A little," Sadie agreed. She thought about it. "But the good kind. The kind where you're sad because it was good, not because it was bad." Vivian looked at her for a moment. "That's exactly the kind," she said. Sadie nodded, satisfied, and went back to Wyatt, who was brushing the last of the snow off the truck's rear window. Vivian looked at him across the distance of the parking lot. He looked back. "Drive safe," he said. "Road should be clear by the time you hit 285. "You too," she paused. "Thank you." "You already said that." "I know." She looked at him steadily. "I meant it both times." He nodded. She got in the car. He finished with the truck, and then both vehicles pulled out of Harlan's lodge and down the access road and onto the highway, turning in opposite directions, her west toward the interstate and then north to Denver International, him south toward the city, same highway, different destination. Sadie watched Vivian's silver SUV disappear around the first bend. "Will we see her again?" she asked. Wyatt kept his eyes on the road. "I don't know. Do you want to?" He was quiet for a moment. The road was clear but still edged with snow, the mountains on both sides bright and hard in the morning sun. "Yeah," he said. "I do." Sadie turned back to the window. "Good," she said, and said nothing else about it. He drove south, and the mountains fell slowly behind them, and by the time they hit the interstate, the landscape had opened out into the high plains, and the sky was enormous, and the world looked exactly the same as it had on Friday, which was the strange thing about being changed in small places. Nothing outside you shifts. The gas stations are where they were. The highway signs say the same distances. You come back to the same ordinary world, and you are the only thing that's different, and the difference is entirely interior, invisible from the outside, running underneath everything like groundwater that won't show up until you go looking for it. What? He didn't hear from her for 9 days. He hadn't expected to. He'd given her his number in the lodge parking lot. She'd asked for it, which he'd registered without making too much of, and she'd given him hers, and they'd both understood, without discussing it, that the next move was hers to make. She'd left a Blizzard with 4 years of unprocessed clarity and a company restructuring to oversee and a family to repair and a COO to have a very honest conversation with, and she didn't need him adding to the list of things requiring her attention. So he went back to his life. Monday, the shop. Tuesday, Sadie's piano lesson, where he sat in the small waiting room and did not think about inventory even once, which was its own small achievement, and where Sadie played hot cross buns with the concentrated ferocity of a musician performing at Carnegie Hall. Wednesday, a difficult transmission job on a late model pickup that took most of the day and required 2 calls to a parts supplier in Pueblo. Thursday, parent-teacher conference where Sadie's teacher mentioned that Sadie had told the class about being trapped in a blizzard with a billionaire, which had generated significant discussion. He called his sister in Fort Collins on Thursday evening. They talked for 40 minutes. He told her he wasn't moving and he wasn't taking the fleet job, and he needed her to hear that and stop worrying. And she said she heard him, and also she was going to worry anyway because that was her function as an older sister, and he told her that was fine. And they made plans for her family to come to Denver in February. He couldn't remember the last time they'd made specific plans rather than vague gestures toward getting together sometime. On the 9th day, his phone lit up with a San Francisco area code. He was under a Honda Civic at the time, running a diagnostic on a brake line. He wiped his hands on a shop rag and took the call. "It's Vivian," she said. "I know," he said. "I saved the number." A pause. "How are you?" "Good. How are you?" "Disoriented," she said. "But functional. Functionally disoriented." A beat. "I told Marcus everything. About the restructuring, about handing over daily ops, about the fire thing. We met for 3 hours on Wednesday. He cried a little, which I was not prepared for. "What did you do?" "I didn't run," she said. "That's the main thing. I sat there and let it happen and said I was sorry, which I was, and then we talked about what comes next, which took most of the 3 hours." She paused. He's good. He's really good. I've been underusing him for years, and he's been doing his best anyway, which makes him significantly better than I deserve. What did he say about that? He said, she stopped. He said, I never stopped believing in what we're building. I just needed to believe you believed in me. Her voice shifted slightly. That's the kind of thing that doesn't go away once you hear it. No, Wyatt said. It doesn't. I've got 2 weeks starting Friday, she said. I'm going to Tempe first, Joel's family. 3 days. A pause. Captain Rex is apparently in a transitional phase and is now accepting the name Joel Jr., so that's progress. Big development. Enormous. I'm also going to see my parents. I haven't been home, to their house, in 14 months. My mother is already cooking, which she started doing approximately 4 minutes after I called to say I was coming. A pause that held something she wasn't quite saying yet. And then after Tempe and after my parents, he waited. I thought I might go back, she said, to the mountains. Not the lodge specifically, but that area. Another pause. I looked up Halcyon. There's a small inn on the main street above the hardware store. I thought, she stopped. I thought if you and Sadie didn't have plans in the second week of January, you might want to get pancakes at Ruby's. He leaned against the Honda Civic. Through the shop's open bay door, Denver was doing what Denver does in January. Cold, clear, the mountains visible on the horizon, doing their daily job of reminding the city what it's surrounded by. Sadie would want that, he said. What about you? I would want that too, he said. The pause that followed was brief but had content, the specific quality of a silence between two people who have said something true and are letting it be true without immediately covering it with qualifications. Okay, she said. Good. Good, he said. After he hung up, Danny came in from the yard and looked at him with the particular attention of someone who has known his employer for 6 years and can read the room. Good call? Danny asked. Yeah, Wyatt said, and went back under the car. He told Sadie at dinner. He said a woman they'd met at the lodge was going to meet them in Halcyon in a couple of weeks, and Sadie looked up from her pasta with an expression that communicated clearly that she had been expecting this news and was satisfied by its arrival. For pancakes? Sadie said. For pancakes. At Ruby's? At Ruby's. She considered this briefly. Can I have the kind with blueberries this time? If they have them. She went back to her pasta. Good, she said. He looked at his daughter across the dinner table, at the specific and irreplaceable face of the person who had given him the most important education of his life, which was the education in how to keep going. When keeping going seemed like the wrong size for the grief you were carrying. She had taught him that without knowing she was teaching him anything. She just kept needing breakfast and piano lessons and answers to questions about snow and someone to push her on swings high enough to make her laugh. And in the meeting of all those needs he had, without noticing, built himself back into someone capable of more than just surviving. He thought about what he'd said to Vivian. The gap is a fact. What you do next is a choice. He believed it. He also knew it was harder than it sounded, and that he'd only gotten to the belief through 4 years of mornings when the gap felt like the only thing there was. He thought about her in San Francisco, in whatever she was dismantling and rebuilding, and he thought that for someone who'd built her entire life on the premise that difficulty was just distance between where you are and where you're going, she was probably going to be fine. Not perfect, not healed or resolved or fixed, just fine, in the specific and durable way that fine really means when it's earned rather than performed. But the second week of January came in cold and bright, the mountains getting the kind of clear sky winter weather that makes everyone who drove through them in a blizzard feel slightly foolish for having worried. Wyatt and Sadie made the drive on a Saturday morning, Sadie narrating from the back seat with the authority of someone returning to familiar territory. Halcyon looked different in the clear cold than it had the morning after the storm. Smaller, somehow, and more itself. A town that had always just been a town, going about its town business regardless of who was driving through. The main street was dry, and the hardware store was open, and Ruby's diner had a hand-lettered sign in the window that said, "Blueberry Pancakes Today," which Sadie pointed to with the vindication of someone whose faith in the universe had been confirmed. Vivian's rental car was already in the small lot beside the inn. She was waiting outside Ruby's, on the sidewalk, in a coat he hadn't seen before, dark green, less structured than the ones she'd worn at the lodge. The kind of coat a person buys when they've decided to be somewhere rather than just passing through it. She had her hands in her pockets, and she was looking at the mountain at the end of the street with the same expression he'd seen on the porch the morning the storm ended, which was the expression he'd decided he liked best on her. Open, present, not performing anything. She turned when she heard them. Sadie went to her directly and without preamble, in the manner of a small person who has made a decision and is implementing it. She took Vivian's hand. "They have blueberry," Sadie told her. "I saw the sign," Vivian said. "Are you having some?" "Obviously." Sadie approved of this and led her toward the door. Wyatt fell into step beside Vivian, and they walked the few feet to the entrance of Ruby's diner in the cold morning air, with the mountains behind them and the smell of coffee coming through the door. And for a moment none of them said anything, which was fine, because there was no gap in the silence that needed filling. He held the door. She went through. Sadie was already talking to Bev about blueberry pancakes and whether the blueberries were fresh or frozen and what the difference was in terms of taste, which Bev was fielding with the experienced patience of a woman who has been answering questions about her menu for 37 years. They got the corner booth again, the one with the electrical tape patches on the vinyl and the window onto the main street. The morning sun came through at a low angle and put everything in that honest winter light that doesn't flatter so much as clarify. The nicks in the table, the rings from years of coffee mugs, the specific ordinariness of a place that has never tried to be more than it is. Bev brought coffee and orange juice and 3 menus nobody opened. "How was Tempe?" Wyatt asked. "Loud," Vivian said. "Joel has 3 kids under 8, and they live in a house that was not designed for their noise level, and dinner took 2 hours because everyone kept interrupting everyone else." A pause. "It was the best dinner I've had in years. How was Joel Jr.? He spent the first hour pretending I wasn't there, which Joel said was actually a good sign because it means he was comfortable enough not to perform. By the second hour, he was explaining to me at length why a certain animated character could beat a different animated character in a fight, with evidence." She wrapped her hands around her coffee mug. "I have opinions now, about animated characters. This is new for me." "Important opinions to have," Wyatt said. "Apparently non-negotiable in that household." She smiled. "The real one. The settled, full one that had room in it. My parents were—" She stopped. "My mother cried when I got there, not dramatically. She just opened the door and looked at me and her eyes went. And then she pulled herself together and told me dinner was at 7 and that I was too thin." She paused. "And then she fed me for 3 days." "And your dad?" "We watched the Hubble documentary together." She looked at her coffee. "He fell asleep 20 minutes in, which I did not know because I was watching the documentary. I only realized when I heard him snoring, and I thought, I could wake him up, or I could just sit here." She paused. "I sat there, for the whole documentary, with him asleep beside me on the couch." Her voice shifted slightly. "It was the most comfortable I've felt in, I can't tell you how long." The pancakes arrived. Sadie's blueberry stack was architectural. 4 pancakes high, the berries pooling purple into the batter at the edges. She regarded it with the seriousness it deserved and began applying syrup with precision. Vivian had ordered the same, which Sadie noted with approval. "How's the company?" Wyatt asked. "Running," she said. "Marcus sent me a weekly summary on Friday. 3 bullet points, everything stable, 1 minor client issue resolved, 1 new partnership in early discussion." She picked up her fork. "He didn't call to ask me anything. He just handled it and reported." She paused. "I wanted to call him 4 times. I called him 0 times." "That's the hard part," Wyatt said. "That's the whole part," she said. "Trusting that it holds without you." She cut into the pancakes. "It held. It'll keep holding." "I know." She looked at him. That's somehow the strangest thing. Not that it might fail without me. I always knew it probably wouldn't. The strange thing is what it means that it doesn't need me the way I thought it did. She paused. I spent so long making myself the load-bearing wall, and it turns out the building had other walls. So what does that make you? She thought about it. Free, she said. I think that's the word. Terrifying word. But that's the one. Sadie looked up from her pancakes. Free is good, she said, as if this required clarification. Free is good, Vivian agreed. They ate for a while in the comfortable quiet of people who have already said the important things and can now just eat pancakes in a corner booth with the winter sun coming through the window. Sadie told them about an argument she'd had at school with a boy named Marcus, different Marcus, about whether sharks or eagles were more dangerous, and the argument had ended inconclusively, and she was still thinking about it. Depends on the context, Vivian said. That's what I said, Sadie said, triumphant. Good answer. He said context was a weird word for a first grader to use. You should introduce him to some of the words I used in first grade, Vivian said. My teacher called my mother. Sadie was delighted by this. What words? Words I'm not going to teach you, Vivian said. Ask your dad in 10 years. Wyatt looked at Vivian. Don't do that to me. She looked back at him, and there it was again, the full smile, easy this time, without effort, coming up the way things come up when there's enough room for them. He hadn't been sure, in the 9 days since the lodge, whether what existed in that room during the blizzard would survive the return to the ordinary world. Whether it was the specific product of being sealed in together by a storm with nowhere to go and nothing to perform for, or whether it was something that had its own structure independent of the conditions. It had its own structure. He could feel it sitting there between them, real and somewhat inconvenient in the way real things often are. Because real things require something of you. They don't just happen to you. After breakfast, they walked the main street, same as they'd walked it 5 weeks ago. The hardware store, the outdoor equipment shop, Doug's antler shop where Doug remembered Sadie and asked about her carving progress. Sadie showed him the bird piece and told him she'd been practicing on bars of soap, which Doug said was an excellent technique. They walked to the end of the street where the town ran out and the open mountain valley began, and stood at the edge of it looking at the view, which was enormous and silent, and the kind of beautiful that makes argument feel ridiculous. I've been thinking, Vivian said. About what? Wyatt said. About a lot of things. She kept her eyes on the mountains. But specifically, I grew up in Colorado Springs. Did I tell you that? No. I haven't lived here in 15 years. San Francisco made sense for the company. It still does. But I've been there so long I stopped thinking of it as a choice and started thinking of it as just where I am. She paused. I'm not saying I'm moving back, but I've been thinking about what it would mean to be somewhere that felt like mine again, not just where the company is. And I don't know yet, but I'm thinking about it, which is different from not thinking about it, which is where I was 2 months ago. She finally turned and looked at him. I've made a lot of decisions in my life based on what was optimal. Best position for growth, best environment for the company, best use of resources. She paused. I've never made a decision based on where I wanted to be. And where do you want to be? He asked. She held his gaze. I'm working on that, she said. Some of the variables are still being identified. He understood from the way she said it, from the way she held his gaze while she said it, that she wasn't only talking about geography. He didn't look away. Take your time, he said. The variables will sort themselves. Sadie had wandered a few feet ahead and was crouching at the edge of the road, examining something in the snow with intense focus. There's a beetle, she called back. In winter, how? Beetles are tougher than people think, Wyatt called back. She stood up. She looked at both of them standing together at the edge of the mountain valley with the specific observational accuracy of a child who misses nothing and judges nothing. Can we come here again? She asked. Like in spring, when the beetle has more friends. Vivian looked at Wyatt. Wyatt looked at Vivian. Yeah, he said. I think we can manage that. They had lunch at the inn where Vivian was staying. Soup and sandwiches, nothing elaborate, brought out by a teenage boy who looked like he'd been asked to do this against his preferences. Sadie ate half her sandwich and fell asleep sitting up, and Wyatt caught her and arranged her across the inn's small lobby couch with her coat as a blanket. And when he turned back, Vivian was watching this with the expression that she always had when she watched him with Sadie. Part observation, part something that didn't have a clean name. "I want to say something," she said when he sat back down. "Okay." "In the lodge, some of what I said, at the hardest points, the things I admitted." She looked at the table. "I don't do that. I haven't done that in I don't know how long. And I've been thinking about why I did it with you specifically, whether it was the blizzard, the situation, whether you'd have said it to anyone who happened to be in that room," he said. "Yes." She looked up. "I don't think I would have. I think it was specifically you." She paused. "You didn't need anything from me. You weren't impressed by the company or the money or the Forbes thing. You were irritated by the Forbes thing, actually. Only a little. You asked me questions nobody asked me. You didn't let me deflect." She paused. "And you answered your own questions honestly, which made it harder to be dishonest." She looked at him. "You're not an easy person. People tell me that. Do they mean it as a compliment?" "Not usually, but I sleep fine either way." She laughed, the free, surprised version, the one that got out before she could review it. It had the same quality as the first time he'd heard it, but less surprised now, more comfortable with itself. "You said that before," she said, "in the lodge." "Still true." She was quiet for a moment. "I don't know what this is," she said. "What we are. I'm not—" She stopped. "I'm not going to pretend I know how to do this. I've been in 3 relationships in 11 years, and all 3 of them ended because the company took everything there was to take, and the people ran out of patience for the remains." She looked at him. "I don't know how to be in something that isn't the company." "You've been pretty good at it this weekend," he said. "This weekend is 4 hours in a diner and a walk down a mountain street. And 3 days in a blizzard." "3 days in a blizzard," she conceded. "You're doing fine," he said, "for what it's worth." "You're a mechanic from Denver," she said. "You have a 6-year-old daughter and a shop and a life that is, by every objective measure, completely different from mine." "Yeah," he said. "Those are complications." "They are," he said. "You want to not do this because of the complications?" She looked at him. "No," she said. "That's rather the point. I've been doing the rational, optimal, complication-free thing for 11 years, and I know exactly where that leads. I'm not interested in where that leads anymore." She paused. "I'm interested in the complicated version." "It will be complicated," he said. "I want to be clear about that. I've got a kid and a mortgage, and I work with my hands, and I'm going to come home with grease on my knuckles, and I'm not interested in changing that." "I know." "And you've got a company and a board and a COO who's going to need you sometimes, even when you're trying to step back, and that's real too." "I know that too." "So we go slowly," he said. "We don't make it more than it is. We see each other when we can, and we're honest when it's hard, and we don't pretend the complications aren't there." She looked at him steadily. "That's your proposal?" "I don't make proposals," he said. "I state what's true and see if the other person agrees." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "I agree," she said. He nodded. Across the room, Sadie made a small sound in her sleep and pulled his coat tighter around her shoulders without waking up. "She's going to be insufferably pleased about this," Vivian said, looking at Sadie. "She already is," Wyatt said. "She decided it before we did. She's 6 years old." "She pays attention," he said. Vivian looked at him, and then she smiled. The full version, the real one, the one that had room in it. And this time it didn't surprise her, and it didn't surprise him, and it just sat there between them, comfortable in its own existence, the way things get when they've been arrived at honestly. They drove back to Denver in the late afternoon, Sadie asleep before they hit the highway, the mountains behind them holding the last of the light in reds and golds that faded slowly as the miles accumulated. Wyatt drove with one hand on the wheel and the radio on low, and the particular quiet in his head that he recognized as the quiet of a day that went the way it was supposed to go. Not perfectly, Not without friction or uncertainty or the normal weight of complicated things, but right, in the way that matters, aligned somehow with something true. He thought about what he would have told himself 4 years ago, sitting in a parking lot outside a Denver hospital at 2 in the morning, trying to understand how the shape of his life had changed so completely in a single afternoon. He would have told himself that it gets less heavy, that the small okays accumulate, that the mornings get easier and the evenings get quieter, and Sadie grows into herself in ways you couldn't predict, and she brings you along with her whether you're ready or not, that the shop becomes yours in a way you didn't expect, and the 4 people who work for you become something close to a second kind of family, and you find a rhythm that isn't what you planned but that fits. He would have told himself that you don't stop missing the person you lost. You just build a life big enough that the missing is one room in it rather than the whole house. He hadn't planned for Vivian Hartwell. He hadn't planned for a blizzard or a corner suite or 3 days of conversation that stripped things down to their actual components. He hadn't planned to find, at 34, in a snowbound mountain lodge in Colorado, evidence that the capacity for surprise was still intact. But that was the thing about plans. They were useful until they weren't, and the places they couldn't reach were the places where the most interesting things were waiting. He didn't know how it would go. He knew the complications were real, and the distance was real, and the differences were real. He knew that trust built slowly, and that slowly was the only way it built that actually held. He knew that Vivian was in the early stages of dismantling something she'd spent 11 years constructing, and that the rebuilding would take longer than 2 weeks or a month, or maybe even a year, and that it would be uneven and imperfect. And occasionally she would retreat to the old systems because the old systems were known and the new direction was not. He knew all of that. He was fine with all of that. What he also knew, and this was the thing that mattered most, the thing he would return to when the complications made everything feel heavier than it needed to be, was that she'd been honest. In a small room in a Colorado snowstorm, with the blizzard working the windows, and his daughter asking too many questions and no escape available in any direction, Vivian Hartwell had been honest. About the birthday on the airplane, about the 7 months without calling her father, about the 4 in the morning dark of her San Francisco office, and what it felt like to be running out of things she'd never admitted she needed. Honesty like that was rare. He'd spent enough years around people to know it, and it was the kind of thing that, once you'd seen it, changed what you considered possible. Sadie stirred in the back seat. "Are we home?" she asked, without opening her eyes. "Not yet," he said. "Go back to sleep." She did. The highway opened ahead of them, straight and well lit, and the city appeared gradually on the horizon. The glow of it first, then the shapes, then the specific familiar grid of it materializing out of the dark, the way home always does. Not arriving so much as revealing itself, the way something that has always been there becomes visible when you finally look in the right direction. He thought about what Vivian had said that last morning at the lodge. "I want to remember what it felt like to write that first program at 12. That feeling of magic." He'd thought about it several times in the 9 days after, about what it means to rediscover the thing that made you want to build anything in the first place. Not the achievement, not the recognition, but the pure mechanics of engagement, the specific joy of something responding to you, the feeling of a system clicking into place because you understood it well enough to make it work. People lost that. They lost it to scale and responsibility and the weight of being taken seriously. And most of them never went looking for it again, because looking required admitting they'd lost it, and admitting that required a kind of honesty that most people avoided until some unavoidable disruption, a loss, a crisis, a blizzard, forced the question. Some people were luckier than others. Some people had the question forced at 32 instead of 60, with enough life ahead of them to do something with the answer. He thought Vivian Hartwell was going to do something with the answer. He was quietly certain of it, in the way he was certain of things he'd diagnosed carefully and gotten right. Not arrogant about it, just grounded. She'd built a $4 billion company on the quality of her thinking and the relentlessness of her will. Those didn't go anywhere. They just needed different work. The exit for his neighborhood came up and he took it, winding through familiar streets past the grocery store and the elementary school and the gas station where he usually filled up on Saturday mornings. He pulled into the driveway and sat for a moment with the engine off, listening to Sadie breathe in the back seat and looking at the house, which was small and somewhat in need of a fresh coat of paint on the trim and entirely, specifically, his. He got Sadie out of the car with the ease of a man who has done this in parking lots and movie theaters and other people's driveways and on front porches at all hours for 6 years. She woke up just enough to wrap her arms around his neck, and he carried her inside and up the stairs and into her room and put her in bed with her coat still on because she was asleep enough that he wasn't risking the coat battle. He stood in the doorway of her room for a moment, as he always did, watching the rise and fall of her breathing in the dark. He thought about her on the mountain street in Halcyon, crouching down to look at a beetle in the snow. How? She'd asked. In winter. How? He'd told her beetles were tougher than people thought, which was true. They were also smaller than people thought, small enough to find shelter in the smallest gaps, to survive temperatures that seemed impossible, to emerge when the cold passed and go about their business as if the winter had been nothing more than an extended intermission. He went back downstairs. He made coffee he didn't really need and sat at the kitchen table and looked at his phone. No messages. He opened a new one to Vivian, made it back. Sadie's asleep. Good day. He sent it, set the phone down, picked it up again 30 seconds later because he had one more thing to say. Thank you for coming back. He set the phone down, picked up his coffee. Outside the kitchen window, the Denver sky was the specific dark of a clear winter night in a city. Not black, never black in cities, but a deep gray purple with enough reflected light to see the bare trees in the backyard and the fence line and the shape of the world he'd built out of grief and stubbornness and the simple daily practice of being there. It wasn't a perfect life. He wouldn't have claimed it was. It was his life, which was something entirely different and considerably better. His phone lit up. Good day, she wrote. Then, after a moment, a second message. I'm already thinking about spring. He smiled at that. He left it on read because some things don't need a response right away, and because she'd said it twice. The spring thing, in different words, twice. And he believed her. He drank his coffee. Outside, the winter held the city in its cold, clean, indifferent grip, and the stars above the light pollution were faint, but there, the way they always were. The way Rigel was there, every clear night, whether anyone was looking or not. Some things just wait, patient and constant, for the moment when someone finally looks up. He went to bed. He slept well. And in the morning, as always, there was Sadie, awake before him, sitting at the kitchen table with a piece of paper and a crayon, working very seriously on a drawing of 3 horses standing close together in a field of snow. What are you drawing? He asked, putting the coffee on. The horses from Halcyon, she said, without looking up. They look good. They're keeping each other warm, she said. Yeah, he said. He stood at the counter and watched the coffee brew and listened to the scratch of his daughter's crayon on the paper. That's what they do. And that finally, after all of it, after the blizzard and the small room and the long, honest nights and the complications that were real and the distance that was real, and the imperfect, uncertain, completely unplanned thing that was beginning to take shape between 2 people who had not planned for each other. That was enough. More than enough. The first light of morning came through the kitchen window and fell across the table, and Sadie drew her horses in the snow, and the coffee finished brewing, and the world went on. Ordinary and specific and full of the kind of quiet beauty that doesn't announce itself, that you only see when you've learned to stop long enough to look.